All right, should we get started so that we can make sure to stay on schedule? Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's nice to see how many are joining us today. And as you can see, we have people joining from all over. If we can switch to the next slide. Yep. So thank you all so much for being here with us. My name is Kristín Gunnarsdóttir, and I'm one of the co-presidents of Women of Writing, or WOW, along with Gulnuz Kamali. Gulnuz, maybe you can wave to say hi. And for those that don't know WOW, we're a student-run organization at Johns Hopkins University that's dedicated to supporting women in STEM through community building, networking, and professional development opportunities. And today marks our third annual Women in STEM Symposium. And we are so happy to be here and be able to host it today, virtually for the first time. All of us on the WOW board have waited for this day for a very long time now, but as some of you might know, we unfortunately had to cancel our 2020 symposium due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're extremely happy to be able to be here and do this today. Before we get started, Gulnuz and I would like to, on behalf of WOW, express our sincere gratitude and appreciation to everyone who has worked so hard over the past few months to make this event a success. We don't want to take up too much time, but just specifically wanted to thank our advisor, Christine Kavanagh. Thank you for being so open to all our ideas and for your endless encouragement and support. We also want to thank all other Hopkins staff and faculty that have helped us. And finally, we want to thank our amazing organizing committees, both for this year's and last year's symposium. We truly could not have done this without you. This event would also not be possible without our fantastic sponsors. We are very grateful for all the support that we have received. And last but not least, we want to thank our amazing speakers and panelists for agreeing to participate. We are so excited and honored to have each and every one of you joining us here today.
So like Christine mentioned, we usually have a symposium every year. Unfortunately, last year had to be canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But when we have our symposium, we have usually a central theme that we believe is relevant not only to our audience members, but to the current climate. And while looking back this past year, the theme that stuck out to us is the overall idea of advocacy. There are times in your personal and professional life that you need to be championed for not only yourself, but also for others. Never has this idea of learning how to support yourself and those around you become more apparent and critical than this year, when boundaries became blurred with the onslaught of Zoom calls, being online 24/7, seeing the workplace and home become one in our current political landscape. So to highlight this theme of advocacy, we've curated 2 days of talks and discussion by some amazing women who are leaders in their field of academia, government, and industry. And today's theme will be advocacy at work, which will feature a keynote from Ms. Brittany Young, followed by panel discussion, and ending with a special keynote from Dr. Swati Mohan. Please use our hashtag Women of STEM Symposium 21 to not only win some cool prizes, but to get the discussion going, because what we learn here today shouldn't stop here. And also, please submit any of your questions that you may have to the presenters using the Q&A tab, and you can also upvote others' questions. So without further ado, let's introduce our first keynote, Ms. Brittany Young. Brittany Young is the founder and CEO of B360, an organization that utilizes dirt bike culture to end the cycle of poverty, disrupt the prison pipeline, and build bridges and communities through STEM education and career opportunities. Since launching in 2017, B360 has served over 7,000 students, hired 30+ dirt bike riders, and worked tirelessly to change the narrative around dirt bike culture. Brittany's accolades include being handpicked for Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott's transition team, TED, the Social Innovation Lab at Johns Hopkins, and Echo and Green, and many more. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Teen Vogue, Mashable, Freethink, Entrepreneur, Attention, NBC Sports, and Afrofunk. B360's partners have included Red Bull, Toyota, HBO, and many others. We are so honored to have her here today. Welcome, Brittany Young.
I want to say thank you all for having me. Like a lot of people, my Zoom is not the best. So I'm going to be on audio on my phone and then let someone else control the slides. But I'm really appreciative of spaces like this that not only allow me to share my work, but to meet more people and to continue sharing the stories of the youth and young adults I work with, as well as growing the Baltimore narrative. And I had to laugh in my bio because sometimes I forget that I've done all of that. Because for me, I'm just a Black girl from West Baltimore, and I carry that with a badge and a pride of honor, and I always put that first. So yeah, we can go to the next slide, but I wanted to say thank y'all for having me, and I really appreciate and look forward to this conversation. And next slide whenever you're ready. So it's Sundays in Baltimore. You can, yep, the one with the park. It's Sundays in Baltimore. I'm 12 years old. I'm at Druid Hill. I'm watching dirt bike riders go past, zipping, popping wheelies, doing tricks, doing stunts. One of my friends, we're learning how to fix our bikes. The rider is talking to us about the gas to oil ratio, talking to us about how when you pop a wheelie, he has to think about how long it's going to take to get down the street. I'm excited. I hop on a bike and I'm ready to go. Next slide. Then on Monday, I go to school. My teacher gives a pop quiz. She's talking about how y equals mx plus b, how a train leaving from Philadelphia is supposed to reach to Cleveland, but I'm here in Baltimore, so I'm confused. What does this STEM stuff have to do with my life and what I'm doing right now? I failed the test, I get frustrated, and I walk away. Next slide. Then my parent is showing me all of the X Games, Monster Cross, and Supercross on TV. I'm excited because I'm like, oh, I'm going to see someone who looks like me. I'm like, they're doing the same tricks, the same stunts that I was seeing in Druid Hill Park. But when I look closer, it's no color. Next slide. What I'm realizing is that in cities like Philadelphia, next slide, Boston, next one, Oakland, next slide. And then back here in Baltimore, the only thing that I've seen with dirt bike riders has been incarceration, dirt bike task force, or the confiscating of thousands of bikes. So I don't understand these worlds. In my frustration and my stress, I hop on a dirt bike, I take off, and I don't think school is for me. Next slide. This is the reality for like a lot of school students. Mine was a little bit different, but still similar. In Baltimore, the sign of summer is dirt bikes. I was one of the kids in the park that used to watch the riders, pop wheelies, do tricks and do stunts. I tried riding, but let's just say I don't like to fall and it's not for me. At the same time, I was also excited because I was watching Bill Not a Science Guy. That was the first time I had seen like explosions. I was like, I'm in first grade. I want a chemistry set. I went to school. I was telling my teachers how I had this chemistry set making polymers, making things explode. I blew off my eyebrows at 6. But instead, all they heard or what they saw was that I was a troublemaker. And then my desk got put next to the principal's office. Then as I became the woman in industry, I was 19, my first job out of Poly, working as an engineer. And I was confused for the secretary for a week. I had to decide, was I going to be frustrated and mad and quit this job, or was I going to stick it out? And in me sticking it out is what led to, in 2013, me wanting to do more programming for students, specifically in Baltimore, and then hosting and creating a robotics programming for students to compete. Then in 2015, as the world watched following the Freddie Gray uprising, I was in 3 places in my life. Wanted to leave the STEM industry because I was fed up, I was tired, working at Baltimore City Community College to build bridges from GEDs to NASA, and then also creating and teaching students in K through 12 education. Then I was also a sister. My youngest brother was tried and incarcerated for nonviolent offenses and ultimately went to jail as an adult, even though he was a kid. Out of all of my frustration is what birthed B360, and I also realized my purpose. is that it's to show people how smart they already are and to keep making sure that our voices, our agency, and our ingenuity are respected. And I truly believe people closest to the problem are the solution. Next slide. You can go to the next one. So what happened in Baltimore, but could have been any city, when people talk about the stress factors that we face, what people really don't realize is that stress ultimately results to more crime, more homicide, but also different alternatives to solving it. So this could have been a map of Cleveland. It could have been a map of Miami, of Oakland, Detroit, Chicago. The list can go on. The same places that ride dirt bikes. And what we see is that in all of the areas of grid, we have the highest concentration of Black people. We have the least educational opportunities, which results in higher unemployment and ultimately a disinvestment in Black communities, period. Many riders see dirt bike riding as a release to their stress, and also these same neighborhoods often face the most incarceration. Even though Baltimore is about this big in the state of Maryland, the same communities where I'm from, we get policed a lot more and spend about $300 million annually policing our communities. I kept wondering and asking, like any scientist and an engineer, what was the solution to these problems? And again, I didn't wait or let people tell me what it was going to be. Instead, I dug deep. And in us digging deep, I noticed two main problems that we can tackle. Next one. One is the need for more Black STEM professionals. But right now in Baltimore, we have over 100,000 STEM careers that can move community forward out of poverty. But what I didn't see, just like the story I explained earlier, was a better pipeline of teaching students young and old that the stuff that you're doing is actually relatable. You can't just throw a textbook at a student and say, go learn. Next slide. And then the second was wanting to make sure that for nonviolent offenses, we do not police or incarcerate our way, but instead do programming. In this presentation, you'll see a lot of our students. What most people don't know, just because they own a dirt bike in Baltimore, they're seen as criminals. So this is a picture of Deron. Deron in this picture was 12, now he's 14. He goes to Bluford. He wants to become a mechanic engineer. He's a dirt bike rider as well. But because Deron owns a dirt bike, under the current policies and systems, he's also a criminal. And that's not good enough. Next slide. So what B360 does is we intersect 3 lanes: STEM education, unrecognized potential, and dirt bike riders. And I want to bring y'all into our world. And this is one of my favorite videos that you're going to see next.
Dirt bike riders are a part of Baltimore, whether we like it or we don't. And if that's what we do is ride dirt bikes, it's our recreation, it's our sport, it should be acknowledged, and it should be acknowledged in how to do it the safest way. So of course, by wearing helmets, safety equipment, not riding in traffic. We are a city with a lot of challenges, but with a lot of challenges means a lot of solutions. B360 literally means be the revolution. B360 is a social enterprise. We hire former street riders to work for our students to get them into science, technology, engineering, and math through culturally relevant STEM education programming.
Everybody that ride dirt bikes don't know about STEM, and everybody who know about the STEM field don't know about dirt bikes, so we could bring them together and help out each other.
So when they fix and repair their bikes, that's actually them taking themselves through the engineering design process. When they pop a wheelie, that's a physics equation.
We're not trying to cause any harm, break any laws. We just want to have fun doing what we love doing.
Mike rode dirt bikes in the streets until about he was 17 when he started working with me. So we were taking the person that was perceived as a problem, and he's now the person that's teaching them how to do better. But he's also learning how to build, code, design, and 3D print at the same time. In 2015, I saw 2 distinct reports, one showing that Baltimore had over 200,000 STEM careers, which could move communities out of poverty.
A lot of kids change their perception on technology and science because they understand there's more to it now.
So far, we work with over 5,000 students and counting. We've hired over 22 riders and growing.
You know, there has a slogan, bikes brings bonds. Like, you meet guys and women from everywhere, different cities, states, and you just come together as one when you ride dirt bikes.
You always want to see something that you identify with. You want to know that you have a place you belong. And I'm saying you can do things right in this avenue, and your dirt bike is that vehicle, and that vehicle can propel you further.
What I want for myself is I want a career. I want to have somewhere for the kids to ride and just enjoy themselves safely, freely, and just be a part of something that's a change.
So that's one of my favorite videos because we actually get to hear from students and riders, and they co-produced it with Red Bull. So what B360 does in tackling these problems is three things. One, we change perceptions. That means who engineers are and who dirt bike riders are. That a dirt bike rider has the same mechanic skills that pays the bills that you would go to school for, but has never been shown how that talent can actually transfer into more things. The second is a platform for social change, that in order to move communities forward, in order for the US to move forward, we need to make sure we do programming and not incarceration, especially for Black and Brown communities. And then, of course, we create jobs and opportunities for now and the future. Next slide. And so the big three ways of how we help, going from my right to the left, is we create a culture shift. Instead of spending $300 million annually, we want to make sure we're more efficient. That means transferring riders from out of traffic into programming, which can increase public safety, grow community relations, and again, it's less costly. The second is events and motorsports. We know the motorsports industry is a $32 billion industry, but it does not have any people look like me. It could be 100 billion plus with this style of riding, but also ways to grow the economy and to make sure riders as well get paid and compensated for their time. And then our bread and butter of where we live is in our education program. We directly hire riders to run it. I have nothing to do with it, thank goodness. But it's really important to show how representation matters. And a lot of STEM programming is made for students and people who love it. We actually capture people who never thought STEM was attainable, and that's what I'm most excited about. Next slide. And so when I think about programming, we started in 2017. Kamaya was one of my first students. Similar to the story I explained earlier, she didn't see herself in the STEM space or in the motorsport space, but now she wants to go on to like culinary arts. She wants to become an engineer, and it will keep changing. But what I most know is that no matter what industry she goes into, she'll be equipped because of the skills that we're teaching and how she always represented herself. Next slide. And so in our programming, we teach students how to build, code, design, and 3D print model-sized dirt bikes. And then in the summer, we apply the theory of engineering to helping them fix and repair their bikes. We've done work with city schools, recs and parks, and so far it's been 7,000 students that we've served and grown. Next slide. But the way that we do this is going to be shown through this video, and it was also produced again by Mike and the team to bring you into our classrooms.
My main purpose is to have young riders just like yourself become interested, of course, in dirt biking. Also learn the fundamentals of engineering, robotics, ultimately get paid helping fix dirt bikes, and be a real integral part in the dirt bike culture here in Baltimore. This is a helmet, and this was made from the 3D pen to 3D printer.
So like in that video, you can go to the next slide. Our secret sauce
My main purpose
is really the instructors that we hire. So you saw Journey, you saw Mike, and you'll keep seeing them a lot. So what we do for people that are over 16, we put them in our workforce program. So you learn everything that the younger students will with more, and then they also learn classroom management. So we always tell people we don't want them to be like Michael Jordan, but Michael Chester, a person from Baltimore that did ride dirt bikes in streets, that was incarcerated for dirt bikes. But since being with B360, he no longer rides in traffic. He has produced events. He's our lead instructor and has helped us train and grow more people. Next slide. And how that shows up is in our three things that we've been able to get done. So pre-COVID, we were able to retain at least 23 people for instructors, so directly hiring them. 8 went on to community college or more, and then doing direct job placement. And Mike in this ecosystem actually worked at Red Bull and is a pharmacy technician. And the biggest thing that we're doing is providing opportunities. Next slide. And so for me, this was an idea in 2016, which sounds so long ago, but it wasn't. I was in the Social Innovation Lab at Johns Hopkins at the same time as being a part of Baltimore Core's Elevation Awards. So I received a $10,000 planning grant for this crazy idea, as well as being in this SIO, which is like a business accelerator on steroids, if you're not familiar with it. That led to me being on the former mayor's Dirt Bike Task Force around solutions. So working with DOT, working with Rex and Parks, working with the Dirt Bike Police Task Force. And after our first year, we launched with a 30 student education pilot, but had served over 1,200 students and was able to hire 8 dirt bike riders with only starting with $10,000. That led to being a part of Red Bull. My first pitch competition was called Black Girls Ventures. I'm an Echo and Green Fellow, an OSI Baltimore Fellow, a Baltimore Homecoming Hero. And by 2018, we had also won Social Innovator of the Year and was the number 8 startup in Baltimore City. This keep growing, that by 2019, we had served 7,000 students, had placed 36 dirt bike riders, and we're really shifting the culture. And in 2020, we secured our largest partnership with Microsoft for $300,000 for the next 2 years, which is specifically for economic justice and to make sure we grow a pipeline to Microsoft and to startups locally. But I think the biggest thing that we've done outside of these accomplishments was great is really our power in storytelling and the advocacy / agency that we've given not only to people like me, but to people directly here in Baltimore to keep retelling this story. Next slide. And so some of my favorite like highlights pre-COVID, which I hope we get back to, you'll see in this Duran, Tony, and Kamaya with Mike in the back. They traveled with Toyota for 8 cities, and this is now the Texas one, to fix and repair bikes, and then were gifted the bikes that they repaired at the end. And I thought that was really important because, you know, they're kids from Baltimore who were now being paid for their experiences and then also living out their dreams of competing. And of course, they got the midst of school, which they liked as well. But it shows that you can start really early, you can start later in this industry and how far we want to go. Next slide. Another one was from 2019 as well. You see Mike on the Jumbotron. So this entire stage in MetLife Stadium, which was for motocross, they co-designed. So from the jumps to figuring out the leaps, you see like the dirt mounds, they had to actually like figure out the distance between each one to make it happen. And then Mike and the crew did a whole, you know, presentation, but also an interview, which debuted on NBC. And I wasn't there, and I felt good to see how they've grown in their spaces, but most importantly, they're not afraid to own who they are and where they come from. Next slide. In 2019, we also were featured in the American Motorcyclists Association magazine. And so it's the first time for the style of riding. The AMA is also the people that control motorsports for like the country. And this year, I'm actually winning the Bessie Stringfield Award. So Bessie Stringfield was a pioneer in motorsports and the first woman inducted to the Motorcycle Hall of Fame. Her legacy is about new market and industry potential. And for me with Bessie, I feel like she started and carved out a lane around advocacy and using dirt bikes for radical thinking that I'll get to finish in my lifetime and to make sure we don't have opposition in the future. Next slide. And we closed out 2020 with a campaign with HBO Max. So when I think about my own legacy, continuing Bessie's, this is what I mean. That not only do we prepare people for STEM fields and careers and more job opportunities, but we've also been able to teach them how to better tell their stories and to make sure that no matter what happens, that they are in the forefront of all of the conversation. And you're going to go from the left one that says HBO Max to click it. And I want to introduce you to Damon.
It ain't just about dirt bikes. It basically gets kids from the negative to the positive side. When dirt bikes wasn't around, there was a lot of killing. Then you get on a dirt bike, everybody stopped killing. Your whole mind just clear. You just focus on you riding. It's just you and that bike and that wind.
We've been together since day one.
Like the tricks I do, he do.
We pick up off of each other.
I feel like we're gonna make it doing this. If we all come together, we can make something.
So that was Damon. Next is Daron.
When I was 6. My brother, he was a good person. He had a good heart, and all he liked to do is make jokes, ride dirt bike, and just be around family. It came to the point where he passed. My chain, it's a picture of him on it and my shirt. When I'm on a bike, I just think about him and my family. That's all I'm gonna really worry about until I get out of Baltimore City, and I'm gonna take them right with me. Once you get on your bike, it ain't no turning back. You just go. Say for instance, I'm riding, I pop a wheelie, and then I fall. I'm getting right back on the bike because it's just a life lesson. You gotta run with that, especially if you getting back up and not giving up. And that's one thing I don't do. I will never give up.
And last but not least is Tony.
School, and a teacher named Miss Young invited me to be in this program called B360. Then she started taking us on trips. And when we went there, it was a whole bunch of dirt bikes and stuff. And she was telling us that we was gonna ride them. But I ain't believe it until we actually started riding them. That's when she realized that it was real, that we was actually really doing something other than being in the streets.
So those videos are important to me, but also for their own stories. Tony, Daron, and Damon are a special group of students now. I've known them since they were in 5th grade when I was their teacher. And for them, they've done all of our curriculum. They're like our traveling road crew, but I would say would represent some of the best of B360 and where we can go. And of course, the STEM careers is movie roles, is opportunities, but the way that they told their stories is really speaks to the advocacy that we do. You never once heard them say that they were poor Black kids from Baltimore, and that's important because the way that we're often described and the way that people learn to describe us being from the city, you would think that's all there is to talk about. And so with this series with HBO Max, which piggyback off of another movie, we were finally able to put real life people on the big screen that could tell their stories for a short amount of time. And that's the type of stories that I want to continue to grow, not just only in STEM, but around Baltimore and our cultures. Next slide.
When I was 6, it came to the
And so thinking about this journey again, and when we really look at the math and like what it costs, in 2017, we launched for just $10,000, which is funny to say, but also part of the same problems. And then 2019, 2020, we really grew to over 7,000 students and started making some more hires. But our big goal for 2021 is about $900,000. Most people do not know that I do this work, from love, but I'm still a volunteer in my own org. And we really look at what it takes to sponsor an instructor, to sponsor a student. That's a lot less than what it takes to incarcerate a person. So you can go to the next slide. So when you really do the math, 80% of people came to our programming not knowing anything about STEM or wanted to go into that field. 100%, of course, came for dirt bikes, but by the end of programming, over 91% wanted to go into the STEM field or opportunities we presented. We've also seen a 45% increase in our ready test scores. Then when we look at public safety, since 2017, we have decreased dirt bike arrests by 81%. So it was 43 in 2017. By 2020, it's only been 8. And I won't be happy until it's at 0. So that means I'll keep working and we have a lot further to go. But that speaks to the real value of programming and how we can have the same goals, outcomes around public safety and metrics in STEM, but really the value that we bring in this space. Next slide. And so when you really do the math, right, instead of spending $300 million annually, we have saved the city of Baltimore $1.3 million by providing job opportunities to people over 16, and is on track to save Baltimore $233 million in the next 5 years by continuing to do programming with the young adults and youth that are under 16. And I think that's a better story. Next slide. So where we're going for B360 is a lot of what we've done has been able to sustain, honestly, these service contracts. So in our organization, going from my right to left, grants and donations have actually been the hardest. One of the big problems that we've seen in like the funding landscape, not just in just STEM or motorsports, has been honestly needing people to change their views on why our programming works. Even if you don't understand it, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Where we want to go is really into more products. So that means creating things like safe spaces, helmets, dirt bikes equipment, and STEM education tools that I want to package and sell our curriculum to more cities, to more communities, and to really make sure we continue to make our money. And then the biggest expense that we have is making sure we make jobs and create them. But I think that's a really important thing, because without more jobs, more opportunities, we're going to keep running into the same problems. Next slide. And so the two big things that we're working on right now for B360 is a part of a campaign called Ride for Change. With the Vela Foundation, we'll be redoing a 15-passenger van, which will become a mobile classroom. So about 20 students and about 5 riders, socially distanced. We'll be gutting it out with the support of Microsoft to make sure we can go right into communities, provide Wi-Fi access, provide use of it like a learning pod, and so much more. Next slide. And my biggest project to date will be to finally raise capital for a space. So for years, Baltimore has talked about a dirt bike park, but it's so much more. We want a space to do indoor riding, outdoor riding, to have auto body mechanic shops, take our classes, to bring in more organizations that need space, and to really own the future of this industry, from education to motorsports and things that I haven't even thought about yet. Next slide. And the big thing that I always want people to take away is Daron, me, Kamaya, we're here in Baltimore. I'm always a champion of this city. I'm born, raised, never leaving, because I believe in it. But what I want more people to do is to see the value we have, that when you look at me with my curly hair, that I am a STEM professional. Daron is a STEM professional. Kamaya is too. And we also are people that may have differences than you, but we belong, we deserve opportunity, and we need our voices to be recognized and appreciated in order to keep going. So I appreciate y'all having me, and I want to definitely open it to more questions, a conversation. And of course, you can like us on Facebook and Instagram at B360 Baltimore, and our website is b360baltimore.org. And it's one question so far.
Yes, I can kind of help moderate some of the questions for reading. That was an incredible talk. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I am one of the WOW committee members, and we thank Brittany so much for coming and speaking with us. That was so motivating. Oh my goodness. One of the questions from an anonymous member that says, what are some key pillars of culturally meaningful STEM education that B360 has found most important? So what are some meaningful STEM education pillars that B360 has founded? And then can those be transferred to other non-mechanical STEM fields?
Oh, yes. I think our model is something that can go to like anything, not even just in STEM, but period, when we write curriculum. At the core of B360, that's why our name is Be the Revolution, is all about community. In the classroom, it's not me teaching, it is actual dirt bike riders who look like, sound like, and identify directly with the students we work with. And I think that's important, that a lot of times the top-down approach, that people make curriculum or, you know, make STEM education in a way that students can't relate because they don't directly identify. And it takes a special skill to have that empathy to make sure that when you create something, you bring the community in tenfold. And that's why I said my biggest thing is to make sure that people know how smart they already are, and to make people realize the asset to solving any problem, no matter what it is, the core of it has to be the people that are closest to the problem. And yeah, I think our curriculum is not only mechanical because we teach like C++ and Java, but is a good example of why it works, because we relate directly to the people we serve and is in a language that they understand. I'm not talking about, you know, fluid in a way that a textbook would. I'm talking about fluid in terms of how does the dirt bike need the best gas to oil ratio, or I'm talking about Newton's laws in terms of like popping a wheelie, which is the same thing, but it's something that they used to hearing and used to seeing and thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on this a second ago, but as far as like, this is something that you have particularly reached out to dirt bike riders in Baltimore. But Sarah wanted to know, are there any plans to expand this program to increase interest in STEM for youth that happen to not be dirt bike riders? So maybe those particular instances don't make sense to them, but maybe there's another area that they that you could branch into.
Yeah, we definitely have done programming too with students that are interested in dirt bike. And it's been the same because they, you know, they've seen dirt bikes in some capacity, even if it's on a screen or if it's like locally. Even if you don't ride, you still can finally put like a face to STEM. And I think that's always been missing. Like even me growing up, you know, you're like, what? Well, STEM wasn't a word, but what is STEM? Like I knew I liked explosions, I knew I liked science, and I liked, you know, everything that got me in trouble, but I never could say like, oh, what I was doing was STEM, because no one ever combined the two. And I think that's just the beauty of us just showing people, yeah, the textbook stuff is nice, but unless we relate it to like real world stuff, we'll lose so many kids and so many people.
Absolutely. Alex wanted to ask, other than donating, which you had mentioned, what are some ways that you can ask the community to help? What ways can students that are on this call get involved?
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest ways is we will be launching our public campaign for the Capitol space. So we'll need more ambassadors. And when that goes live, so if you like subscribe to our website, it will go live hopefully in September with that Capitol campaign. And we need ambassadors. So people that can just share their stories, like either in STEM or being enthusiasts and championing us. And overall, I think what we need is just more, you know, even if you don't have money, you have time. So we have volunteer opportunities. Like I said, the summer is here. We will be very busy this whole summer. So you can definitely come, learn from us, teach with us, volunteer your time, and then just really champion us in spaces that I'm not, because I never know our reach, but I know people that can put us in different rooms.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of getting into that idea of maybe branching out into other areas for sure. Let's see. James wanted to know, what were the biggest surprises to you as you built B360? And then like, what advice would you give to someone who wanted to emulate another program in their city?
One of the biggest surprises is that people think when you do good work that people will just give you money. Like of being a nonprofit, that's not the case. That's why we're a hybrid. So very early on, having to realize that I can't rely on grants and donations. I think like that slide when I showed our sustainability showed that locally in Baltimore, we've only seen $50,000 in grants, even though we've worked and done all this good stuff. And our business model is very like robust, just because we wanted to make sure we had different ways of funding ourselves. And then I would say the second thing would be, most people think we're open source, which is a problem. That no, we're a business. So having like city and government officials from other cities approach me with the guise of wanting to pick my brain. And I really can't offer them anything because they need to pay for our services. And so that would also be my advice. If you are looking for B360 to be in your city or want to work with us, please do. Because it's harder to, brand differently. And I think, yeah, some of the biggest challenges have been, honestly, being a Black woman in this space, like whether it was STEM or philanthropy or business, just because our value, we have a lot, but people don't necessarily like to put dollars to it, or expect you to just do the work because I do have to, because my kids will be Black, but I also need people to make sure that they're financially contributing, because if not, we can't exist.
Mm-hmm. And then just as a follow-up question to that, what you just mentioned, like, do you find that it was hard for you as a woman to make an impact in a dirt bike culture that is predominantly male?
Not really. No. This style of riding is actually it's like a 40-60 mix of women and men that ride.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and I'm from here, so the hardest part was really just making sure that they knew I was from the same city, the same community. Mm-hmm. So my first meeting before we launched was actually with our students to make sure I was going in the right path. And this is like testing your assumptions for people thinking about starting their business. The second thing was to actually meet with dirt bike riders. Before we launch a program with dirt bikes, you have to have the riders behind you. And that was actually not that hard, because I had a lot of cousins that rode, that knew like the older riders that really like controlled the scene here. And then the third thing I did was went to the police commissioner, Kevin Davis at the time, to basically get amnesty, and he loved the program. And so that was like the behind the scenes stuff that people don't know, but that's what I mean about like, anytime you're going to do impact work, or anytime period when you start your business, you need to test your assumptions. But for impact work, unless what you're doing is working with the community that you're doing the work with, not for, I said with, you're kind of doing it wrong. Because a lot of times people make solutions, but if you don't make the solution with the people that are part of the problem of the solution, then you didn't really do the solution correctly. And I think that gets missed a lot.
Right, getting to the root of it for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see. A Wangoi wants to know, she says, thank you so much for your presentation and the work you do. How do your students find B360? And then what's your approach and philosophy for engaging other young people in Baltimore?
Yeah, so we have a good bad problem is we can't get rid of them.
That's great.
Yeah. So the biggest has been word of mouth. So when we launched in 2017, it was with a 30 student education pilot. I was also teaching at the same time. So I had 4 jobs, I think. So I was in engineering. I was working at a community college. I was a teacher. This is like when I thought I had free time, and I just started B360. So I started with 30 students. How I made the curriculum was also because I was a teacher that only had 5 computers. So I had to figure out what I was going to do and to have them be engaged. 30 grew to 150 because then all of the students that were in a different after school program wanted to join us. And what I thought was going to be 8 weeks grew to 15 weeks. And so that was the beginning. And then us getting up to 7,000, that was also not my plan. That was just like how many people wanted to join us. So how students usually find out is our Instagram page, word of mouth. And then when we do programming with like schools, they do a big push. The rec centers, so with rec centers locally in Baltimore, they will be having like a sign up and waiting list. And then we also have a waiting list, which we had to disable recently, just because we get so many kids and so many people that want to be a part. But our problem is like having that capacity or that infrastructure financially to make sure that they get programming, and all of our programming is free.
Got it. Cool. That's amazing. Another anonymous attendee wants to know, do you have a favorite engineering project that you work on with the bike riders?
my whole business is an engineering project. So like now I consider myself like a social engineer, right? Because it's like engineering is a thing, or like that background, I would say, of how we think of solving these problems. So all of B360 is a whole engineering project when you like dig deep into it.
Right.
I would say my favorite probably at the moment will be this mobile classroom. To see them, they will be doing all of the work. They're working with a design firm on what they want to have in it, and to really see them put it together. That's actually going to be probably one of my favorite things right now. And then when we get to building out what the space we want looks like and seeing their ideas and like actually them building it too, a lot of them are actually like construction workers and that kind of stuff. And we have a lot of older artists that are just like naturally gifted in that space. My favorite is going to be seeing how all of the thoughts come together, and when that's a living and breathing like body that we've completed together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sony wants to know how many females benefit from this program. Does your organization actively try to recruit more women and encourage them to participate in STEM?
Yep, so it's about a 40-60 mix. Our last cohort actually had more girls than boys. So we just did
Incredible.
a virtual cohort with the Pratt in One Book Baltimore with D. Watkins. So it's a specialized program around still building model-sized dirt bikes, but they also learned like the art of storytelling from an asset frame. And it was a class of probably 32. So about maybe 20 were girls. And that was great. And then our two instructors for that were actually women as well. So we actually have a lot of women instructors. We have men instructors too, but we have a good mix. And then me as like just Brittany Young, one of my big things, a part of how before I started B360 was I used to host women in STEM conferences and women and girls conferences to promote more girls, especially from Baltimore, and more women period into the space. And I have about 7 mentees to this day, who are all engineers. One goes to Morgan. Another one is working on a $400 million project actually for Hopkins with White and Turner. Another is a project engineer, and she actually is one of our lead instructors too in her free time. And another is in cybersecurity with Booz Allen Hamilton. So me, that is one of like my passions, as well as being like a voice to them and vice versa.
Yeah, that is really incredible. I think, so we have one more question from Shafali. I think, so they're asking if there is a nonprofit that works closely with you. I would say in addition to B360, do you have any other organizations that you work with?
Yeah, we work with a lot. Like I said, Microsoft right now is our biggest partner. I'm actually with 2 other organizations. We launched what's called the Baltimore Legacy Builders Collective. So 3 Black-led organizations that came together for one goal of empowerment. Our model is to be able to gift it to other orgs, like a legacy org. It's called like a fund. Right now, we share like a development professional. So, you can't work in the business and on the business at the same time, or it never grows. And so with the 2 other orgs, the B org and I Am Mentality, our goal is to not only do our direct impact program, but we're like changing philanthropy, that we work together to serve more people, but then we're also working to get philanthropy to change their views on why donating unrestricted funds to Black orgs is important. And in the future, we will be replicating our model so that more orgs can like have collectives. So another 3 orgs will come together to share a professional. Another 3 orgs will share a professional, and we want to be able to like gift them like seed money towards that so they can grow.
Got it. That's incredible. And what a unique way to like make sure that you keep giving back to other organizations that are doing really cool things. Yeah, I think that's actually, okay. We probably have time for one more question that just came in the chat. It says, how do I introduce your organization to the dirt bike riders in my neighborhood? I want them to ride safely with helmets and not get arrested. My neighbors have called the police before. So how do you approach someone to tell them about B360?
It's 2 sides. I think one, don't call the police. 2, you can call us. You can go to our website, b360baltimore.org, and honestly invite us to the neighborhood. we can have those conversations with your neighbors as well. I think the biggest problem that we've seen, not just in Baltimore, but period, is it's not enough like proactive conversations. People don't know why riders ride, unless you ask them. Dirt bike riders ride in streets because where else would they go? And then you all, people didn't realize that owning a dirt bike in Baltimore can be a misdemeanor. You can get your bike confiscated, and you can also get a misdemeanor charge, which prevents people. So I think just having those better dialogues and conversations will also help de-escalate more situations, and build bridges and communities that weren't there before. So my advice would be, just call us. We can do a pop-up workshop. We can like work on recruiting them, but also have the conversations with like your neighborhood or your community association.
That's incredible. That sounds great. Thank you. Thank you so much again for coming. And we were so excited to hear all the things that you've been working on. So with that, we're gonna start to transition. Brittany has another meeting happening in like 10 minutes. So, so we will let you go. Thank you again for coming. And so we're gonna make a short transition. Let me share some slides with you. I need to close this one. But that, by the way, was me that was messing up all of the, oh my goodness, how to get out of this? All the slides a second ago. So, and let's do this.
And while you're posting the slides, Rachel, we just wanted to, again, thanks, Brittany. Our advisor, Christine Kavanaugh, she's mentioned that this was an incredible talk. Also, we had Darlene Sapporo said that she was really inspired by your work, and thank you for what you're doing. So I think we just want to echo, I think all of our members or audience was saying. I know you can't really see them, but it was really cool and very impressive. So thank you so much for sharing and taking time out of your busy schedule for us.
Thank you all for having me.
Great. So we can take about I think, so we have about 3 hours of our time booked. So I think that we can maybe take about a 3 to 4 minute break as we start to transition into our panel, which is going to be on advocacy at work, and we are going to have our 3 panelists join. So as they start to come on, let's take about a 3 minute break, and we'll reconvene in just a second. everybody. All right, everybody, let's all right, we're going to go ahead and start. I think we're still waiting on Melanie to arrive, but we can go ahead and start doing some of the introductions, and then hopefully she'll join us here in a minute. But thank you so much for our other two panelists for joining us. So we are really excited to have a panel on advocacy at work. We are joined by Dr. Azadeh Yazdan. She's a Washington Research Foundation Innovation Assistant Professor of Neuroengineering, and her research focuses on developing neural technologies that are stimulation-based therapies to help restore function and mobility in people with neurological disorders, such as stroke. And I've just been told that Melanie is on, so we are excited. Melanie is a Hopkins graduate and now a lecturer here at Hopkins. She founded the Food Computer Program, which is an organization that teaches students how to use technology to design solutions to challenges in Baltimore communities. And then we're also joined by Dr. Erika Ross, who is the Director of R&D and Applied Research at Abbott Neuromodulation, where she leads applying research strategy, developing external partnerships, and plans product execution. Her research includes computational modeling and then the preclinical and clinical feasibility and safety trials that feed into new products. So we are so excited to have all of these women here today. So I'm going to stop sharing so that hopefully we can see everyone. Hello. Welcome. It's been fun. I've gotten to email these women for months at a time. So I'm so excited to actually get to meet all of them in person now. So thank you again for joining us. And I figured I, just gave a very brief introduction to all of you, but I thought it would be really great if you could just kind of start out our panel by telling us, who you are, how you got to be where you are, and then we can kind of start more of questions from there. So let's start with, I think, Erika, you're on the big screen right now. So do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Yeah, great. And Rachel, thanks again for the invitation. This is such an excellent and exciting event. I love the focus on advocacy for women in science and engineering. It's really, really wonderful to see how much you guys emphasize this. So so I'm Erika Ross. I head up applied research. I sit within the research and development department within Abbott Neuromodulation. I head up a team of data scientists and biomedical engineers who are really focused on developing and inventing what's next for neuromodulation. And it's a blast. I love every day. It's not easy, but it's really fun. Before this, I was at a startup company that came out of the Stanford biodesign program called Cala Health. And that's another neuromodulation company that I joined as the 15th person there and left as I think we were 65 people at the time, but we went from an idea that came out of the clinic to launching a product in 2.5 years. So it was a total whirlwind in learning how to translate something. And before that, I was an assistant professor at the Mayo Clinic in neurosurgery. So working on some DARPA projects there related to peripheral nerve stimulation and memory. So that's my story.
And where did you train, Erika? Where did you go to school? And
yeah, so I did my PhD at Mayo Clinic, and I did my in neuroscience. But I was raised by biomedical engineers. I did my PhD with a neurosurgeon who had no time to have PhD students. So I learned everything I know from biomedical engineers and who were really focused in the neural engineering field. So I have a lot of gratitude for that. And before that, did my undergraduate degrees in biology and business at the University of Denver.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about Melanie? Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel. I will totally echo what Erika said. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's really awesome to see all of this advocacy in terms of career and all this other stuff, especially in STEM fields. Cool to see all so many people here and so many people interested in this as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I, as some background on myself, I went to Hopkins as an undergrad. So I'm pretty much a Hopkins lifer at this point, I think. like my entire career in some connection to Hopkins. So I went to here for undergrad in chemical engineering. I did my master's in engineering management. And through that, in my capstone in my undergrad, I started a company, which ended up not actually working well. But I think throughout my career has been like very windy road, somewhat still 1 foot into the STEM fields. So after that company kind of fizzled out, started this organization in Baltimore called the Food Computer Program, where students build essentially like computer controlled farms in science classes in high school. One, to build that foundation of connecting technology to maybe like seemingly non-technical things, but also to bridge the gap between, you know, what's happening in the classroom and what happens outside of the classroom. So we focus on, you know, what can you do with your expertise in this technology, your expertise in Baltimore in general, and kind of do something that's meaningful to you. And that I coupled with my experience, I worked as a data analyst in Baltimore city government, really gave me a good, you know, formative experience in understanding the importance of education. And I think especially probably everyone in STEM and similar to Erika, like mentorship matters a lot and your people around you matter a lot. And I think that has really fueled me to be really interested in education and education programming and policy and impact and understanding how all those things fit together and how that is really important in any context. So as a lecturer here at Hopkins now, that's something that I'm really focused on, building that, you know, like capacity, those experiential learning moments where people can say, okay, this is what I'm really interested in. How can I continue to use this? And how can I fit this into like what I feel my purpose is now and what I feel I want my purpose to like continue to grow into in the future, which is something that I think is true of like everyone who's kind of gone through this STEM path and thinking, is this something I'm interested in? Yes, it is. Now I'm going to do startups. Now I'm going to do other stuff. Now I'm going to do this. So yeah, really happy to be here. Thanks.
Cool. We're so excited to hear all of your experiences. This is so great. And Dr. Yazdan, if you tell us all about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm also really excited to be here and meet all of you guys, and also for organizing this wonderful event. So my name is Azadeh Yazdan. I am originally from Iran. So I did my bachelor's and master's there in biomedical engineering, and then came here for my PhD. I did my PhD also in biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, which I worked at the lab of Daryl Kipke, who was one of the first, people who started the field of neural engineering. And he had actually a huge lab. And so then from his lab, I went to do a postdoc with Flip Sabis, who later, in 2016, if you guys know, he started a company with Elon Musk, which is called Neuralink. And so I did a postdoc.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. I know.
So I did a postdoc with Flip. And then after that, I started my job as an assistant professor at the University of Washington. And I started here in September of 2017. So about a little bit more than 3 years I've been here. And so I do neural engineering, and in particular, we want to try to see if we can rewire the brain in a targeted way. A lot of neurological disorders suffer from aberrant neural connectivity, and we wanted to try to see, can we use neural technologies to basically induce targeted changes in the brain, and so potentially developing cure for a lot of neurological disorders that right now there is no cure for them. So that's kind of like the big picture introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we didn't really do this on purpose, but we do have kind of like all branches of, we have the academic side, we have the industry side, and we have kind of, Melanie, I feel like you could be like a part of all the things, so I think that one thing that might be helpful. So, and by the way, anyone that is attendees, please fill out, start asking questions in the Q&A. This is going to be pretty free form. All these women are here to chat with you and answer your questions. I have a few that we can start with and hopefully get everybody started. So I think kind of an interesting question that I think would be good for this group in particular is, when did you decide that this career path was right for you? So at what point did you as Melanie was talking about, have that moment of oh, this is my passion, this is what I want to do. When did that happen for you? I think it might be hard with Zoom. I'll probably just start with one person and then we can kind of popcorn after that. So how about Azadeh, do you want to tell us when you had that aha moment that this is what I wanted to do?
So, you know, mine probably is a boring one, but I always wanted to become a scientist since like I was like 3 or 4. I wanted to become a scientist, and I know that I was mad that I was born late. That I was thinking that everything's already discovered and there's nothing left for me. So for me, it was like at the very, very early ages. But then what like got me interested in the field of biomedical engineering was the fact that I really wanted to, at the same time that I wanted to be a scientist, I wanted to help people, but I was not really excited of becoming a doctor. And when I was exposed to the field of biomedical engineering, I realized that this is a field that I can potentially help people beyond what a doctor can do, because I can develop a product, for example, that can, you know, have like a lot of customers or users, and that can impact like a larger population.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Erika? What do you think?
It's a good question. For me, I too always knew I wanted to be in the medical world in some way, shape, or form. I think my aha moment was the first time I saw a technology that we were testing during my PhD used in a clinical study. We were trying to record dopamine release in the brain in a person with Parkinson's disease, and we were making these diamond electrodes in the lab, and it's just this long process where it took months to years to try to figure out how to make a diamond reactor, how to do all of these pieces that got us to the point where we had something that we thought would be viable to actually record the signal we were looking for. And the first time I saw a signal recorded that looked like release of a neurochemical in the brain in real time, it was like, we just made that thing and we got this information about how the brain's working when you stimulate the brain. It was like, I think I'm hooked in neuromodulation, and 2, seeing stuff that you make used in ways that both help us learn more about how humans behave and how disease happens and how healthy state is targeted, and 2, how we can actually use that knowledge to create new therapies. That was it for me. It's all kind of history from there.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's amazing. What about you, Melanie?
Yeah, I think there are like several formative experiences that I had that then led to me like really being interested in education and like STEM education in general. I think so. At the time that I was running the food computer program, I was also working in city government and running some similar like technology pipeline programs to get hire high school students as data analysts in city government. And at one point I realized that both of those things that I was doing were essentially the same, like saying, okay, how do we get someone from high school to think about the future in a way that you're using technology in the background, but not necessarily that everyone needs to be a coder. And at that moment, it like occurred to me, there's this famous Steve Jobs like graduation speech where he's like, you can't connect the steps moving forward, but you can connect the dots moving backwards. And at that moment, I'm like, oh, every single experience that I had like led up to me like doing these things and really understanding like, okay, how do we start thinking about like what the future of education is and the future of work in light of all these changing technologies, and like in light of understanding that like diversity really matters and representation matters, and having all these people participate in this society. And so I think looking backwards, one of the big movements for me pushing that idea forward was when I was an undergrad and my ChemBE like senior design project essentially was just my advisor saying like, okay, you guys have to create something this semester. It just has to be something that hasn't been created before. And it can be whatever you want. He's like, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but like, you have to do it. And so every week we would meet with him and be like, okay, this is our idea. And he'd be like, okay, cool. Maybe you can talk with this person about it. Or like, oh, this is our idea. Oh, maybe you can talk with this person about like 3D printing. And so like that experience and thinking about like, oh, like, this is why we do learning, is to like do all these things together. And this is why I did engineering, is to figure out like, okay, here's like the background information and here's how I can put it together. And I think that experience really informed like how I approached learning and how I've approached like my interest in education moving forward. which I guess is kind of still evolving because I'm, you know, still doing stuff, but always learning.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's why being a lifelong learner is the engineers, you know, that's how we roll, I think. And that's really great. Tracy says, thank you. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. So one anonymous attendee asks, what is one thing that you wish you could tell your 20-year-old self? So if you're back in like, you know, junior year of college, what is something that you wished you had done, or that you know, some opportunities that you could have found, or something like that? Melanie, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would have tried to emphasize to myself is that the job that you have isn't always the job that you like should be doing at that moment. So I think a lot of times, especially when we're starting off in places, or as like the new employee somewhere, or as like an entry level person, we're like, okay, our task is kind of like tedious or not really meaningful, or like we're not the person who like someone's looking to, we're just kind of helping inform like one part of a 20-part process. But I think especially when you're starting off somewhere and like really figuring out what you want to do, your job is to obviously do that job, but your job is also to learn about that culture and learn about that organization so that you can contribute in the most meaningful way, and then figure out like, is that something that I want to continue to do, or like, how can I use this to do something else? And so I think I would have tried to emphasize that to myself, and thinking about like, it doesn't really matter if you are like, you're not going to be the superstar as, you know, like a freshman intern, right? even you're coming from Hopkins, you know, like super smart, you're like, okay, cool, I got this. Like, why isn't anyone paying attention to me? But thinking about like, okay, my purpose here is to like help make this better. And then in turn, like figure out like, how can I best, you know, incorporate this into my own life, and while also helping like the organization as a whole.
Sure. Azadeh or Erika, do you have some other thoughts for what you would tell your 20-year-old self?
So, you know, I read the question and I was like, there's one thing that I also try to tell myself every day, not just like the 20-year-old, but it's just to take it easy, you know, just take it easy. You live once, just take it easy. So, and I wish I could listen to that. But another thing that, I mean, I take advantage of any opportunity to tell this to, you know, younger generations, and I wish someone had told me this, is that it's okay to go through, you know, different stages of your career or, you know, training while you're having a family, while you're having kids. Like, I think one of the things that I think I wish I've done was I wish I had kids earlier, because I had my son when I had my faculty position offer, right? So, and I think it's really important, and, you know, we are actually getting to a point that there's more understanding around the fact that, you know, we have female professionals who have a family. So there's more understanding in the job environment about that. There's like now more education happening around that. And I think it's also extremely important for our future generations to have younger parents. So, and to have like smart, intelligent parents, because, you know, that's another thing. A lot of people who are getting their, you know, education or training or anything, they're sacrificing, deciding between having kids or, you know, their career. So that is something that I think it's really important for the future generations to think about.
Yeah. Keep life and do life, you know, and don't put everything on hold while you're in training. That's great advice. Yeah. Go ahead, Erika.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, to add to all of that, I wish I had been asking questions of just like learning across the board what was out there, because I had no idea that I would ever be in the position I'm in at the age I'm in. My 20-year-old self would have laughed at that idea. And I think that if I had asked more questions, if I had realized that people are so willing to help and help mentor, and like, I love it. I think all of my peers love it. People above me love it. I wish like the more people who reach out and want to know like what that career looks like, what are the different options, what is the right fit, I think we'll have. I think it's just something I wish I had done when I was 20.
That is a great piece of advice. Let's see. Oh, there's so many good questions. Okay, Claire. Okay, I'm gonna Oh my goodness. Okay. Sony wants to know, when you decided your career path, did you make modifications being a woman? Like, did you have to make modifications in your career path?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
So modifications to the career path, no. Modifications in day-to-day, probably a little bit. I think there were situations for me where like most of my time at Mayo, I was the only girl in the room. And it was regularly that they're like, oh, Erika will organize this or take notes and so I would do that, but then I'd use those situations and play to my advantage. Like, oh, Erika will figure out a way to make the dinner happen with the external guests who are coming from IBM. It's like, yeah, but I'll also sit at that table and learn from the conversation, like because I'm organizing it. So it's situations like that where there was extra work, but at the same time, I used it to provide opportunities I probably wouldn't have had otherwise, and met all of these people because of it, and was able to build the career path that I did. I will say Cala was a pretty interesting place to be because it was an engineering company that was mostly female, and all of the leadership was female. And it was founded by a biomedical engineer named Kate Rosenbluth, who brought it out of Stanford, out of the Stanford Biodesign program. Brilliant, amazing person. And she built a team of mostly women to take that idea to the market. And it was a totally eye-opening experience for me being in a team like that, just seeing how different it can be. So I would say there are differences, but there are ways to leverage things that can be a bit of an impediment and play it to your strength, and play it to build it into something that's an opportunity. And then just make sure to observe when women are leading, what that looks like, and what advocacy truly looks like from the men in this field as well, because there are true advocates here too.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah. Melanie, Azadeh, do you have anything to add to any modifications you've had to make in your career path being a woman?
I'll add on to what Erika said and say, like, yeah, as looking back on all the different jobs that I had and like internships, I realized at one point every single one of my supervisors was a woman, which probably impacted like how I viewed like the workforce in general, which without even realizing it. Like obviously the places that I worked weren't all majority women all the time, but like my direct supervisors, and I think their direct supervisors just happened to be women. And even when I worked in city government, it was actually a majority male department, but every male had a very strong female partner in terms of like their career goals and like their like accomplishments. And I think they were somehow like very much aware of like what that means for like a woman in the workforce. So they would often like raise me up in meetings and say like, oh, well, like Melanie said this, and like, let's like ask questions, and not in like a condescending way at all, and more of just like, let's bring everyone at the same level to the table because we're all in this team together. And so I don't know necessarily like how to manufacture that again, except if you're trying to like look for that necessarily. But I think that played a huge role in me not thinking about that aspect of the career that much in terms of like an impediment. And I also think there's a really good podcast from Andreessen Horowitz. I forget, I think Ken Coleman is like their guest speaker, and he's in technology, and he's like he's older, and he's Black. And so he also often gets questions about like, oh, what's it like, being a minority in technology? And he's like, one of the things that someone told me early on in my career was, people will discriminate against you because of the color of your skin or because of who you are for whatever reason. And he's like, a lot of times, like you can't necessarily change anything about that. But if you constantly look for that in all the experiences that you have, that's only going to push you back. And so obviously you shouldn't, accept things that are like directly like negative towards you, but also don't
use that as a barrier for every single encounter that you have. Like try and just like, I know this sounds maybe it's just like idealistic, like try and like get over it. Like maybe it's not always the best advice, but trying not to think about only that as a thing, just thinking about like, okay, this is what I want to accomplish, and like, how can I work around this perhaps?
Sure. Let's see, we can talk about, Tracy says, thank you for being on the panel. As you've moved from stage to stage in your education and career, how did you overcome any recurrent nervousness or imposter syndrome in a new setting? Wait, Azadeh, do you have any thoughts on did you have any imposter syndrome coming out of your PhD going into a postdoc, and then any imposter syndrome going from your postdoc to your faculty position?
I mean, I think you always are like questioning yourself, right? Can I do this? Is it like, just too big of a job? There's like so much happening and I have to handle, especially, starting a faculty job, there's like, like the scale is just so much in comparison to like being a trainee and then coming to the other side is actually a lot to deal with. But kind of like building off of what Melanie and Erika were talking about, like modifications and being like the only woman in the room, or all of that. I mean throughout my career I had that too. A lot of times I was the only woman in the lab, or I was the only woman on, there has been like a lot of times that I'm the only woman on a committee, right? Or and so what I have tried to do is like, actually that has been my strategy that Melanie mentioned, is that just put all of that aside and focus on the task at hand, right? Just like, I think I see all of those as distractions. So I put them aside and like, focus on them. And that has been my strategy until this past June, that we had the Black Lives Matter movement. And as a result of that, we've had a lot of training on, and it has opened my eyes to so many things that was bothering me before, and I was just putting it aside. I was like, this is not important. I have to focus on like my project, my paper, my grant, and not think about those. But now, like since then, I am thinking more about them, and I'm trying to find a balance between them of like, when I need to speak up, when is the time for me to, basically like draw that line and say like, now a line has crossed that I have to do something about it, versus it's not unimportant and I have to focus on the task. Right?
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know if that was like a good answer to your question, but
oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think then you can, and you kind of, you're developing that sense of when do you speak up, and when do you say like, no, this isn't okay, and this is something that needs to change in this social construct that we have, or this is something that like, oh, this is maybe something where I can let this go so that the project can move forward, and I can be this version of myself that I'm excited about being,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Also, when I was a trainee, right, there was like a lot of times that I wanted to do something, but I was realizing that as a graduate student or as a postdoc, I did not have that much power to do something. Mm-hmm. Now I think as a faculty, I might have a little bit more power to do something about it. So I think that's contributing too.
That's cool. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Any imposter syndrome for you, Erika or Melanie?
Daily, I think is the no, I think it's super normal to have imposter syndrome. I think for me, I've found that I become the expert in everything I'm talking about, and I have to be, and that's it. Like a lot of times what I didn't realize is that you become you end up being the person who knows more than everybody else in the room during your PhD about that topic. And you just kind of grow in confidence. Like, oh, wait, all of a sudden I am the person who knows the most about this thing. And that just like your confidence has to go up after you're like, look at this room full of brilliant human beings, and I know the most about this. Like that is helpful. And so for me, my tactic, I guess, has just been always do that and always get yourself to the point where you feel like you have enough data in your holster to stand up and defend the decisions that you're making. And and have confidence about what you're doing in a day to day. That's been it. But every day there's a reason for me to feel like an imposter.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Erika said. I think like if you think you know everything in every situation and every environment you're in, like you're in the wrong place, or you're not thinking critically enough about your role in that place. Like you shouldn't know everything in every situation all the time. Like there should definitely, like Erika is the expert in her research, right? And expert in all the stuff that she's doing. And I'm not. And so like when we're in those situations, it's good for me to say like, okay, like I, defer to you in making this decision.
Actually, that's a really good point. There are two sides to this. It's like being the expert in what you are supposed to be the expert in, and also having the confidence to say, I don't know, when you don't. And that's an equally powerful piece of this, is just admitting when you need help from other people. It is also incredibly empowering.
Yeah. And humble enough to learn from those people and to know that they're the expert in that thing, right? That's like so great. Absolutely. Claire wants to know what's something in your job that you were nervous to advocate for yourself, but really glad you did eventually. Anybody has one?
Something minor. So when I had started the food computer program, like a few years after I'd graduated from my master's, and then later on really wanted to better understand like city government, local infrastructure, and better understand like why there's this huge gap between emerging technologies and like what's happening in local government. And so I applied to this fellowship called Baltimore Core, where essentially you apply to the fellowship and then you're matched to a local government agency or a nonprofit, and their mission is to like improve social enterprise, social impact, and in the city, basically. And so I wanted to do both of these things at the same time, but wasn't really sure how I would balance it. I just kind of tried to go for it. And then if both of those things happened, was going to figure it out. And so I ended up getting the fellowship and getting placed in this agency in city government. And I think that like this placement was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because the environment there was so like open and like mentor like driven, that it was really helped me understand like what my personal goals were as well. But as we were going through the interview process and as they offered me the job and they're like, okay, this is what we want you to do. And at the time I still really wanted to run the food computer program, because I could see some like, this was very the early stage, and I could see how this was shaping how the students were interacting. I'm like, I can really grow this and like build it into something cool. But like I have this other job offer. And so what do I do about it? And so basically when they were talking about the job, I'm like, well, I'd really like to take this, but I also really want to continue working on this other thing that I started last year. And is there a way that I can work this into my schedule? Like I'll still work the same amount of hours, but I'd like to start my day there and then come here and work later into the day. And basically they're like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Like we're not really big in being here from 8 to 5, those strict hours. As long as you do the work and are here when we need you, that's totally fine. And it was way less of a big ask than I thought it would be. And it ended up working out really nicely. And that I would be there later when people were like, I'd like come in early and then leave in the middle of the day and stay later, which ended up helping me see everyone, because everyone came in at different times. And so it ended up being a plus instead of being like a huge draw to my work schedule.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I would say for me, salary. I mean, I think it's something that we're not very good at as women in general. It feels like you're asking for more, and that's very uncomfortable. But I've had to negotiate salaries a couple times, and it's amazing what you like if you're confident and you know you've done your research as much as you can. It's hard to find transparent information about salaries, but you've done enough research and you feel good about the numbers you're asking for. You stick to them, and I think you will be surprised. Like that's where I've been really anxious about advocating for myself. Like, oh my God, I'm not going to get this job because I'm asking for too much. And they want people will participate if they want you for the role. So that's just something that I learned.
Yeah.
I wanted to add to that because that is what I also like. I not just salary, but I negotiated for so many things when I was interviewing for my faculty job. So I negotiated a job for my husband because he was also looking for faculty positions, and I also negotiated a spot at daycare at UW daycare because there's like a 3-4 year wait list. So I was able to get in, and so which was actually, I think, getting a spot at daycare was more important than negotiating a job for my husband because it was like, it was huge. And so but that's what I wanted to say. So when I was interviewing, I got like very mixed advice from people because I was like, we have this 2-body challenge, and so how I'm approaching that. And so some people were told me that don't even tell them that you're married or your husband is interested in academia or something. And some other people say like, no, be completely transparent to them. And so, and I chose the other path. I was really transparent in my very first interview. I told them that my husband's also looking for jobs, and that would be the only way that we come here if and they ended up like working really hard, like working with different departments. And I have appointments with bioengineering and electrical and computer engineering, but they created a job for my husband in radiology department, right? Which was not available, but they did that. And the reason they do this, and I think a lot of universities do that, is because they are investing on you. They want to make sure that you are happy and you're going to stay there, right? They don't want you to leave. So and that's something that a lot of us don't know when we are going into the job market. And I think this is important. And again, as women, we're like always like hesitant to say like, should I ask for more, and all of that. But you should ask for whatever is important for you to be successful. You have to ask for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so great. That's so good. Let's see. So an anonymous person says, what is a typical day for you and what helps you maintain a work-life balance? So Azadeh, you were talking about this work-life balance. What do you like have to mentally do in your day or something to help you maintain that balance?
Yeah, so one of the things I do, I try to, well, the other thing I have to say is that when I was a PhD or postdoc, I was working nights and weekends, so I was working until midnight, and most of the weekends I was going to campus working. But then I had my son, so when I started my faculty position, after daycare's closed, basically there's nothing I can do.
You gotta go home. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a result of that, I became like way more efficient. I think that is what when you talk to a lot of parents, that's what happens, right? Which means that you can be efficient, right? So when I was a postdoc or grad student, I was taking like more time, like talking to people, and not just like being like focused, right? And so now I've learned more of techniques that I'm focused, doing like, because I know after 6 or after 5 I cannot do anything. And then the other thing I do is that I really have like a very basically defined schedule for every day, that it's just like 8:30 I drop off my son at daycare, then 8:30 to 5 I'm at my office like teaching or research or all of those things, and at 5 I pick him up, go home, we eat dinner till 6 to 7 I play with him, 7 to 8 he watches cartoons, and then that's my me time. So then I go for a walk or do exercise, or exercise by watching TV, whatever, like listening to a podcast, but that is my me time. And then 8 is his bedtime.
Got it.
And so then after he goes to bed, then my husband and I might like watch a movie or something together. But we have like this and this is like every day, that's the schedule. And so
yeah,
that's how
that's great.
Keep the balance between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So keeping a regimented schedule is how you do it. That's great.
Yeah, I do something very similar. It's not so consistent, but I create boundaries for work. Like I know that between these hours, there are exceptions, but between these hours, I won't touch my email. I won't touch my phone, my work phone. Like I just need time away, and I exercise. I have to daily do something athletic, or it builds up, and you kind of lose the ability to self modulate there. But that, and I've learned to delegate really well. My team practices the same boundaries. Like they know that they're not expected to work on weekends or nights unless there is something very, very urgent. So there are exceptions there too, but it's very rare. And so as a culture, I think we build it ourselves. And as leaders in the field, we build it ourselves and can continue to build it for future generations. So I think it's really just about boundary setting, building, and efficiency. I time block. It is the best thing in the world to know, like, I have these sections of my calendar where I have dedicated to doing this thing. And if I don't finish it then that's on me and it eats up my night. And so it really motivates you to get stuff done when you've got time set aside. So very similar.
Yeah. Melanie, any tips?
Yeah, I also work out every day, similar to Eric. Like I have to wake up first thing, drink some coffee, work out, and then I can like get into my day. Otherwise, it won't happen, or I feel weird. And then the next day I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening to my life? So yeah, I would advocate for, even if it's not working out, if it's like going, like outside, doing something that's like consistent. I remember I was listening to a TED Talk a while ago, and he's like, people who like work out every day are like more likely to work out than people who work out like 3 times a week. Cause then you have the choice of like, oh, is today one of my 3 days? It could be tomorrow. And so like just having like what both Erika and Azadeh said, like having a schedule really helps, because then you don't even have to think about what you're doing. You're just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And then you can use that mental capacity to like do the stuff that you really want to focus on and like think about and like do more of.
Yeah. I'm going to expand on this question a little bit, and this might be probing a little too hard, but like, I mean, if you say like, I have this set of time that I'm working and this is when I'm quitting, and, if something doesn't get done, it might not get done until tomorrow or something, but do you feel like your career has ever taken a hit for having a work-life balance? And then like, how have you dealt with that? And then, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, everything that we do is milestone based. Like I have a date and I have to hit it, and it's on me to make sure it happens in one way, shape, or form. So it's about planning, and it's about making sure that you've allocated enough time for yourself to get that thing kicked out the door by that date. So I think no is the answer. Like as long as you plan and you build a way to get things done. I have not taken a hit. In fact, people respect it and model after it. So it's only been positive.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It can also really help you because you can get mentally really, really tired. And so having that balance is rejuvenating you for the next day. Versus if you're not taking that, it's going to be harder for you to continue. Because whatever you're doing, it has to be sustainable, like your plan. And so that like having the balance is the only thing that can, help with the sustainability. Like even like when I was telling you that I was just working nights and weekends during my PhD and postdoc, like with the lab, we were going out for like lunch and coffee, like for an hour or 2 a day, right? So that was kind of like the
breaks.
Right.
Yeah.
But it really helps. That said, for me, it has happened. There are times that I have like several grants due or something, and I have to, take like 1 or 2 days of the weekend and work. So occasionally, like once or twice a quarter, that might happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally think it's like, oh
no, go ahead. Sorry. Go.
I was just going to say, I totally think it's just kind of based on your goals. Like Eric was saying, like milestones, like I was just saying, okay, these are the things that we have to do. And as long as those things are clear, then the other things you need to do will fall in place, and your balance will help those things fall into place. Like, I don't know, I used to do ballet. And so like, if we're thinking of like your body balancing in a specific pose, like as you're learning it's kind of awkward, and you have to like put more effort into some places and put more effort into other places and less into other places. But like once you do it a couple of times, you're like, oh, okay, this is how I'm doing it. This is sustainable. This is what I need to do to reach that goal. And so I think like, as long as you have a clear end goal, I think where people get into trouble is like, I'm not really sure what that end goal is. So I'm going to work the entire night. I'm going to work my weekend so that I can fill this gap that I'm not really sure what I need to fill. So it is hard, obviously, but
if you can have that clear end goal, that's helpful.
Yeah, or even just not having the confidence in yourself to say, okay, this is enough. Like I've done the job, I've done it well, and then you can leave it at work. You know, that's a great point. James wants to know what were some outstanding mentoring experiences when you were a student, good or bad, or what advice would you give academic mentors?
Yeah, I feel like I've been incredibly lucky to have I've had some amazing mentors. Actually, the person who I learned everything I know about neural engineering is another KIPKE grad, Kip Ludwig. I don't know if you know him. Yeah. So he is an incredible advocate. Like I learned from him. He blocked and tackled for me. He's just one of the best. I mean, always there to make sure that there is equality. There have been situations where people treated me differently because I was a girl, and he stepped up and he said that's inappropriate and called him out on it. And I learned a lot from that. I do the same thing for my team members if I ever see it. So it's really positive. I've also had in my current role, my boss and I, he's also a male. He and I were in Europe visiting this lab. And the team were all males. They introduced themselves to everybody but me. And he was like, okay, let's go in here. This is Dr. Erika Ross. She's the one deciding if you get postdoc funding. And we all just walked into the room, and it was great. Like they were just like, oh my God, like this is we've messed up here. And it's moments like that where you have advocates, you have people you learn from, you have people who take the time to make sure that you're standing toe to toe with the people you should be. And I just feel really, really lucky to have worked with the people I've worked with and learned from the people I've learned from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think if I can think back to undergrad, I used to work at the Hopkins Hospital in like a brain imaging lab. And one of the things that my mentor always did was just like not give me directions on stuff, which seems like a bad mentoring role, but it actually helped me learn so fast. And she was just like, okay, we're gonna like figure out if these people have schizophrenia. Like, here's some guidance, but like, I'm not gonna tell you how to use the system. You have to figure it out because she's busy. She's doing her own stuff. And I'm making her sound like someone who was not invested, but she like was doing all this on purpose. She like would tell me this after I would be like, oh, here's what I found. She's like, okay, well, the reason why I did this is so you would figure it out by yourself, because there's so many intricacies that if I tried to tell you, you still wouldn't learn it. And so she did a lot of stuff like that. That was really helpful for me to think about, like, oh, like doing new stuff is not hard. It's hard, but it's like you always will overcome it. And so like taking new things on always seemed very doable after that experience, and thinking about like, okay, like I just need to figure out a little bit and then I can ask for help, but I can just keep going forward. So I think that was something that really shaped how I think about stuff early on. And also to Erika's point about like having advocates for you at work. I know like when I was in city government, we at one point were hiring a bunch of interns and like people to work for us. And so I was on all these interview committees. And it was really interesting to see like people would come into the interview. And so my supervisor was male, I was female. And like oftentimes like we would both ask questions, obviously, but they would only answer to him. And so like when they would leave, he'd be like, okay, well, we're not hiring them. So it was kind of cool to see. I mean, obviously the people who are interviewing didn't necessarily know that that was the reason they didn't get hired, but it was cool to see on the back end to see like, this is what like our culture is founded on. So having that there is really nice.
That's incredible. Yeah.
I just want to add, so I also had like incredible mentors, but the other thing that kind of to Erika's point that I really benefited from was peer mentors. So, you know, as Erika was saying, like Kip and I like we overlapped like 3 or 4 years together in KIPKE lab, but we had like we still have like a very good, strong network of people who graduated from that lab and from my postdoc lab, and not only just like those labs, but people who were like around in those departments that are now faculty. And you know, we get together at conferences, or you know, we just reach out if we have any problems or questions, and so that, you know, support that has been also really, really helpful, because and in some ways the peer mentoring can a lot of times be more helpful than getting direct mentorship from your PhD or postdoc advisor, because they have just experienced that, or they're going through the same thing. So they can help you in some ways. They can help you better in that process. At the University of Washington, we actually have a peer mentoring group that they organize for junior faculty. So junior faculty get together and talk about their problems and brainstorm.
Yeah, that's amazing. It seems like you have some good structure there. That's really great. I think we have time, so we're going to try to wrap up in probably 5 to 7 minutes or so. Let's see. Michelle wants to know, how do you identify when it's time for you to move on to the next stage in your career? Or, or what sort of questions do you ask yourself to reflect? So Melanie, you were talking about, you have this job that you are learning from, but then when do you decide that, okay, I've learned everything I need to learn? What's the next step? When do you decide that?
I think that's the exact word. It's learning. Have you reached a point when you've learned everything there is to learn in that role? Mm-hmm. And if so, it's time to start looking for a place where you can grow more, or find a way to move up so you can learn more. I was always taught to just look at the next level up and try to manage yourself and the things you're doing in that way. Like, just aim there and see what you can actually accomplish. Like for me, I look at the VPs of my company, and I try to understand how much they take on every day, and I try to model everything I do out of trying to manage that much work. And I think that once you feel like you've got your little microcosm under control and you've stopped learning, then it's time to look for the next thing and feel pretty confident that you'll hit the ground running.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great point.
So what I wanted to add is thinking about the imposter syndrome that was brought up earlier. It's sometimes difficult to know if I'm ready, if I'm good enough, your network, like building a good network and relying on your network, can be really helpful, because you might think you're not ready, but you can go to the professors or colleagues lab mates and then you can get insight from them, which can be really, really helpful. And even I really tell my students and the students that I'm on their committee is that when I was going through my PhD, I was thinking as my committee members as some people who I need to sign something for me, or just like be at my qualification exam or like thesis defense. But actually, it's really helpful if you think of them as people who can help you at these stages, right? And help you to see, because if you're only relying on your advisor, your advisor might have like limited knowledge, but when you're talking to 4 professors, then they might know more people. In addition to that, they might know that expanding that network, that through that network, you might encounter opportunities for jobs, openings, right? That you might think you're not ready for it, but they would say that, oh, they're looking for someone exactly like you, and they're willing to wait a year for you, So I think that is really, really important to expand your network and basically go to them to get more information.
Yeah, I would just want to combine exactly what Azadeh and Erika said and say okay, when you expand your network and you have all these people who are offering you jobs or saying you would be perfect in here, you'd be perfect here, we'll wait a year for you. I think that's, back to Erika's point, the perfect opportunity to reflect and say, am I done learning in my context? And say, okay, have I finished what I want to do? Because I think often, a lot of times people also recruit you when you're on that upward hill. And so maybe you haven't actually reached the peak and you want to continue to stay there until you've reached that peak, and then go back and say, okay, now I want to do this next thing. Because if you've only done it halfway, then you'll build up a career of halfway done things. And it's really nice to have a finished thing, right? Or a somewhat finished thing to say, okay, I know how to round this out. I know how to move on to the next one. But yeah, I think I totally agree with what both of you said.
Great. I'd say maybe there's one, let's see. I wanted there to be like one final send out question. Let's see. I also really like, okay, wait. So let's see. I don't know how to say this name. I think it's one Shay Blunt says, what's one thing that you've learned about your leadership skills as a woman in the STEM field? So I think just kind of rounding out this kind of like a final goodbye, like what's thing that you've learned about being a leader in your field in STEM?
I mean, I'm happy to kick this off. So for me, I've learned that leadership isn't telling people what to do. It's giving them a goal and sitting back and letting them use their own skills to hit it. I have a team of 10 now, and it's crazy. Last year, this time it was 4 people. So I don't have time to micromanage anybody. It's one, it's not my thing, and 2, there's just no way I would sleep. Those boundaries we're talking about just doesn't happen if you try to do everything your own way. So for me, there's a lot of things that my team has done over the last few months to year that are amazing and are totally different than how I would have done them. And to me, being a leader in the STEM world is recognizing that there is some art to this. Like we're in an engineering field. I sit in R&D, but there is art to how you can get from point A to point B, especially in science. And so that's been the thing I've learned about my leadership skills as a female. I also think that being leadership is also peer-to-peer and upward, and just recognizing the power that we have as intelligent females to influence like the core culture and the core focus of where we're going in this field. It's been a big learning opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's great. That's so cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, oh, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, I agree with what Erika said. So, yeah, I think, what was the question that we're answering again? I totally forgot.
Yeah, how have you developed as like a leader in your STEM field, and what does that mean? Yeah,
I think building off what Erika said, like trust is really important, and like being a person who trusts other people. I think especially in STEM or in a lot of fields where it can be competitive, or you're trying to like get the right answer. Like it's hard to know like, oh, who do I trust in this environment? Especially if you're going into somewhere new, you're going to an environment to like what we were talking about earlier. If like you're being treated in a different way because of who you are, it can be hard to trust other people, but like building a team of smart people around you and trusting that they'll do stuff, even if it's not the way that you would have thought, like they'll probably do it in a better way. And like having more people in that environment, like can only improve the situation. So like trusting other people, I think has been something that is a little bit challenging for me, but I think is always the best route when I'm trying to do stuff.
It's great. Yeah. Having the leadership and the confidence in your leadership to like delegate and say, okay, you got this, it's fine. That's awesome. Azadeh, do you want to round us out? Any thoughts on being a leader in your field?
Sure. So I completely agree with what Melanie and Erika said. And that's another thing, is that we don't get any training in leadership in management, right? And so one, I want to say this, that Brené Brown has a podcast called Dare to Lead. I highly recommend it to everyone. It's just really good, especially female leaders. So it's a really, really good podcast, so that we get some training. But the other thing that it's also really important, and trust is extremely important. Communication is extremely important. But I think one thing that's, even like more important in all of this is a culture that Erika mentioned, is like, if people are coming to work and having fun. So if you're creating that culture that people are enjoying working together, working with you, and then that goes with like hand in hand with trust and communication, right? But that is, if you are creating this fun environment, that is going to be also really, really helpful.
Right. Yeah, making it a place that people want to work and want to be. That's great. Y'all, this was so fun. Thank you so much for participating. We are so thankful for you. And like, I know that everyone that is on this call is grateful for the expertise that you have given us and the advice and the tips. And we are so grateful to have saying thank you for your time and your all wonderful personalities. It's just so great. So we are going to make a quick transition here. It's right at 5 p.m. We're going to have another keynote speaker coming on. So ladies, thank you so much again. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Feel free to stay on and listen to Dr. Swati Mohan is going to give our final keynote if you'd like to stay on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel. That was really fun, everybody.
Have a wonderful night. Yeah. All right, I'm going to share my screen here for a second. Oh, let's do this one. Okay. So I see that Swati has joined us. So Swati is our, Dr. Swati Mohan is our keynote speaker. I'm going to read her bio as an introduction. Dr. Swati Mohan joined NASA JPL first in 2004 after completing her BS from Cornell University in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, and after working as a systems engineer on Cassini during the Saturn orbit insertion and I don't know how to say this name, Swati, you're going to have to help us later. The Huygens probe release. She returned to graduate school in 2005 to MIT. Dr. Mohan received her MS and PhD in aeronautics and astronautics from the MIT Space Systems Laboratory. And since her return to JPL in 2010, Dr. Mohan has worked on several missions such as GRAIL and OCO3. Swati has also co-founded and manages the Small Satellite Dynamics testbed. For the past 8 years, she has been the lead guidance, navigation, and control systems engineer for the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover, focusing on cruise and EDL. For the last year, her role was the Mars 2020 guidance, navigation, and controls. Her role was the 2020 guidance, navigation, and control operations lead. Dr. Mohan was the mission commentator for the landing of the Perseverance rover on February 18th, 2021. She is currently the supervisor for the Guidance, Navigation, and Control Systems Engineering Group at NASA JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So we are so excited to have Dr. Mohan with us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So we're gonna let her take the floor. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Let me share my screen to see if this goes through.
Perfect.
Can you all see the screen?
It's perfect. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. The topic of this talk is life lessons on the road to success, my particular life lessons. So I'll share some stories in my background of how I got to where I am and kind of the 3 tenets that I think has helped me the most get to where I am looking back in hindsight. And hopefully something in there touches your interest or you can resonate with that gives some motivation for your own journeys. So I wanted to start out by giving a little example of who I am. And Rachel gave a really great bio, but I wanted to focus on not just the things that you can like Wikipedia about me, but specifically those that I really internalize. So my official role, as Rachel said, was Guidance, Navigation, and Controls Operations Lead for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory's Mars 2020 mission. What that means in layman's terms, more generally, is that I am a rocket scientist, but I don't work on rockets and I'm not really a scientist, I'm more of an engineer, but I really enjoy space. I'm a space nerd and I like to build things. So my day job is to build things that go explore outside of the confines of Earth. In terms of my background, I am an immigrant. I was born in India. I came here when I was really little and raised in America, but my family was super strong in both cultures, and I feel like I identify with both. I'm an Indian American, not one, not the other, but an equal blend of both. And then finally, I am a wife and a mother. I have 2 young daughters, and that in and itself has been a challenge to do full-time mom and full-time work, but it really exemplifies who I want to be and part of my identity in being a wife and mother, as well as being an engineer and space nerd. Whoop, that was not the right button. Okay, so looking back on what I learned and the three kind of tenets that I think has helped me the most, the first one is knowing and accepting who you are. So a lot of the exploration I did growing up, I think helped me to find not just what I was passionate about, but also something that I was really good at. So by putting those two together and finding a field where those are combined really set me up for success, because I think I had the intrinsic qualities to succeed in that field, and I was super motivated and interested in that field. The second was to create your support system. No man is an island. No one person can do it by themselves. I definitely would not have gotten to where I am right now without the incredible support from everyone around me, starting with my family, but also my work colleagues and the whole work environment at JPL and throughout my schooling to help encourage me and motivate me to keep going. So I'll share some stories in there. And then finally, to actively do your best. You know, there's no fixed path to get to a particular goal. It's always a journey, and it's always personal based on every individual's desires and wants and capabilities. And sometimes the door is open for you, and other times you have to build the door and open it yourself in order to get to where you are. So I'll give a few examples of how I was able to create some opportunities for myself that really were jumping points for the next role. So I'll go in through each of these lessons learned and show some pictures and kind of talk you through stories about why I think these were my three biggest lessons that I took forward in helping me succeed. So the first one of knowing and accepting who you are. So how did I get from being this little Indian girl to being an engineer at JPL? You know, growing up, I remember very vividly the first time I got interested in space. But it was actually throughout my childhood that I wanted to be a pediatrician. I had seen some family member who was a doctor and could see what being a doctor meant. So I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to be. And for a very long time, because I had said it, you know, at the tender age of 5 or 7 or something like that, I thought that that was it. That was what I had said. So I had to pursue it no matter what. But in the meantime, I found Star Trek around age 7 or 9. I remember very vividly my first episode that I saw, and it had these beautiful images of space, and they were exploring this region of space which no one had been to before, and where the rules themselves were different. And I thought, that's cool. There's places that we know nothing about where life just evolves differently, or it just acts differently, like the rules of physics are different in this place. And the combination of that sort of mystique of space with the artistic images that Star Trek helped present was one of the things that got me hooked. So I would go and check out books and books from the library about all things space related, whether it was Europa, like here, or the Hubble Space Telescope, or the Big Bang Theory. And all my free time was kind of spent learning about space and learning about all the different aspects, reading science fiction, all that sort of stuff. So moving forward a little bit, I went to high school in Northern Virginia, and I mention it here because that was probably the first time that I experienced what I felt like was true failure. So having said that I wanted to be a pediatrician, my county had a magnet school for science and technology, which was very highly reputed. So every member of my family who lived in the area up until that point had gone to this magnet high school. Actually, thinking about it, every other member of my family, even younger than me now, has gone to this high school. But when I applied, I did not get in. In fact, I got rejected both the first time I applied for freshman year and again for sophomore year. And at the time, that was a huge chip on my shoulder, that somehow it was saying because I couldn't get into this school that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't cut out to do science and technology. I carried that chip on my shoulder for a very long time. But in retrospect, it probably was for the best. I went to Hayfield High School, and when I took my first physics class, the teacher I had for my physics class really was a large component of why I ended up going into engineering. The way he taught the physics class just made it intuitively understanding for me. And for the first time, I understood what the power of F equals ma was, that how with that one simple equation, you could explain so much natural phenomenon, and really how it was the building block for engineering and what engineering really meant in terms of building things to do stuff. So after taking my first physics class, that's really when I had the opportunity to compare physics versus the biology. And I realized that the physics came a lot more naturally to me in terms of being able to understand the concepts and apply them. The skills for biology, I was not really any good at the memorization of all the different parts of the cells. I would go into the dissections and couldn't stand the smell of the animals or the act of dissecting. And I had to make a choice my senior year between physics and biology, where physics was not the traditional choice for girls in my high school. Actually, all of my friends were in the bio class, and I'd be the lone one out to take physics, but it's what came naturally. And through the encouragement of this particular physics teacher, in learning about physics and engineering, that's when I made the choice of, I should probably go into this field. I'm better at it. It has more ties to things that I enjoy by nature, like the space, than biology does. And that was the first step in pursuing a career in aerospace. Once I decided to go the physics route, I was basically all in and tried to learn as much about the space industry and how to tie the engineering with the space industry as I could, to be able to find my niche, so to speak. Everything, I went to space camp as a high schooler, which I thoroughly loved. Being able to work on missions and pretend you were on missions really kind of brought you back to that Star Trek of pretending you were on the bridge of the Enterprise in order to seek out some new life or new expedition that you were going at. From there, I tried to get in touch with NASA, because to me at that time, NASA was space exploration in the US. My first internship was at Goddard Space Flight Center when I was still in high school. Goddard was about 45 minutes from where I lived, so it was a great opportunity during the summer to be able to go and work there. The actual internship I had was a pretty menial job. I just had to CAD particular engine parts like washers and nuts and engine components. So that in it of itself wasn't that exciting, but just being on the campus for NASA and working with those different engineers was super cool. We actually had a rocket competition that Goddard was putting on at that time that was open to everyone. So the co-interns and I decided that we were going to compete in that rocket competition. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But those two experiences of the space camp and the Goddard really kind of cemented that space exploration is cool. And I want to build stuff that goes into that, that genre of exploration. So I went to Cornell University for undergraduate, and I specifically researched Cornell because it wasn't one of the schools that anybody in my high school usually applied to. It wasn't a school that I had any connections with in terms of family or friends. But when I was doing research on what schools to apply to, Cornell stood out because they had ties to space programs. They had current projects at that time, ties to the Mars rovers, MER, at Mars Exploration Rover Spirit and Opportunity, where they actually had student projects at Cornell that were building their own rovers. They had ties to the Arecibo Observatory for the astronomy aspect of it. And their department was a mechanical and aerospace department. So it had a lot of flight experience from the aviation as well as the space. So that combination of having the ties to the space program in multiple different facets really appealed to me. And it was such a large school that I felt, even if that particular part didn't intrigue me, that there was still room to move around because they had so many different schools and so many different thoughts that I couldn't really go wrong. I could just, go back to medicine if I wanted to. So I joined Cornell in 2000. I graduated early in the winter of 2004. But during my time at Cornell, I used every summer possible to explore the aerospace industry even more. So I had numerous internships that kind of spread out amongst all the different possibilities in the aerospace field. While at Cornell, I did student research programs. So my very first research program was on this satellite build project for undergraduates at Cornell. It was a CubeSat satellite project, and I was assigned to the attitude control system. So in part of interviewing for this satellite build project, the faculty advisor gave me a really vague interview quiz. He started with, well, do you like things that stay still or do you like things that move? And I was like, well, that's a weird question. I guess I like things that move. That seems like it's less boring. And he was like, okay, well, do you like things that move slowly or do you like things that move fast? I was like, well, I like things that move fast because I don't know, that seems less, that seems more exciting. So based on those fairly vague, esoteric questions, he assigned me to the attitude control system of the satellite. Attitude control is like the eyes and ears of the spacecraft, guidance, navigation, control. We basically figure out how the vehicle is pointing or positioned in space and do the thinking in order to get it back into the right orientation and into the right place in space that it needs to. I had a lot of fun designing that system. I actually joined that role before I knew what controls was about and had even taken the controls classes as an undergraduate. So it was really learning from the ground up. And however my advisor happened to place me, he did a really good job of finding that niche because that's still the same subspecialty that I work in today. Very fortuitous placement. So the CubeSat project I worked on for multiple years during the school year while I was at Cornell. The summers I spent exploring elsewhere. So my first summer was spent at NASA Kennedy Space Center. I was an intern in a program called the Spaceflight and Life Sciences Training Program. And being that this was right out of freshman year, this particular training program brought together the biology and the space aspect. So it did things like growing plants, looking at the astrobiology implications of spaceflight. At the time I thought, oh, this might be the perfect fit because I used to want to be a doctor and now I want to do something with space. So this is a great fit of doing something life sciences, biology related, but in space. I had a lot of fun at the internship, especially in the context of being at Kennedy Space Center and building things, but the application of biology wasn't too appealing to me. It was more rooted in helping things on Earth get above, as opposed to exploring the mysteries beyond Earth. So ended up deciding not to try to pursue that life sciences bent. The next summer, I went to NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I had an internship at Caltech in coordination with NASA's JPL's Team X, which is a concurrent design engineering team. And they really look at mission concepts of really rapid development of mission concepts to different planetary bodies and different science objectives. So you generally get a team of experts together all in one room. The scientist comes in and says, I want to do a mission to Uranus, or I want to do a mission to a Kuiper Belt object, or I want to do a mission to this particular asteroid. And then the team comes together like, okay, how do we figure this out? Like, when do you want to go? What are we going to build? What cameras are we going to take? So that summer we got to do 3 or 4 different missions. It was mostly focused on outer planets like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And my role was to do the trajectories and mission design aspects of it. So how are you actually going to fly this spacecraft? Is it going to go directly to the planet, which would take a long time? Are you going to do a flyby amongst other planets to get there? And that really appealed to me, because you were able to take this science objective of wanting to learn something about this object, whether it was an asteroid or a planet, and then figure out how to go and do that. How would you get there? What instruments would you take? And that really sparked my interest of digging your hands into the exploration of, you have a science question now, how do you go about doing all the engineering to meet the objective of that science goal? So that I really resonated with. I actually went back to JPL the next summer to do research because I loved that environment so much. This time I was on the science side, and I worked on looking at imagery from Mars, orbital imagery, and doing research on whether there was water on Mars. So while that sounds grandiose in a science perspective, my actual job was to look at hundreds of these images, like you can see in this bottom corner, and count the pixels of each of those little gray streaks of lines, and count one by one how many pixels there were, how big across they were, how long they were. And hundreds and thousands of this type of analysis were being done over years and years and years before they finally came to the conclusion with definite proof that yes, these features called recurring slope linii are actually features caused by fluid flow on the surface of Mars. So doing it on Mars, imagery was super exciting, but the actual mechanization of the internship and the type of science did not pique my interest. So I ended up going back to the type of exploration that we did with Team X, and kind of combining it with what I had done as part of my undergraduate research in the attitude control systems, and trying to find a way to put the two together. I graduated from Cornell in 2004. I did a brief stint at JPL, which I'll get into a little bit later. But then after that, I went back to grad school. I went to grad school at MIT at the Space Systems Laboratory, and I had the honor of working on the SPHERES project. So the SPHERES satellites are these 3 satellites that you see here, and they're actually on the International Space Station. So the idea was, if you could have free-flying satellites inside the International Space Station, you could actually test control algorithms on a real mini satellites, but it would be safe to test these, because if something went wrong, the astronaut could just go and grab it and press the reset button, and then you could try it again. So I had the great fortune of starting on SPHERES about a month before the first satellite was launched. So I got to see the whole process of launching the satellite, checking it out once it was on the International Space Station, being one of the 2 people who were authorized to go to Houston to train the astronauts, to talk with them as they're getting ready to do our experiments. And my PhD research was actually on different control techniques. And the benefit was that you could see the whole process where you could conceive of an algorithm, test it on the ground, work out any of the kinks, send it to the Sphere satellites on the International Space Station, test it in a microgravity environment in real space, and then learn from that and be able to iterate and improve the design, which is what we do for these large scale missions like Perseverance or Curiosity, except the timescales for that are on the order of a decade, as opposed to here, we were able to do it on the order of, weeks. So being able to work with the control system in space with the real flight data, that was really phenomenal. I learned a lot about how to operate spacecraft and all the different things you need to consider, not just one, because the spacecraft is a whole, it's almost like a whole person, right? There's different systems like the skeletal system and the thermal system, and all of those have to work together in order to achieve the goal that you're trying to do for that mission. So after having gone through undergraduate and having these internships that really focused my interest in the control systems for spacecraft and exploration in deep space, so to speak. After I got my PhD in 2010, then I went to JPL, which is really the foremost institution on outer solar system and interplanetary type of exploration. I worked on Cassini briefly between undergraduate and graduate, and this was an exciting time because Cassini was conceived of the year I was born, back in 1982. It was launched in 1997 when I was still in high school. And it had such a long cruise that by the time I finished undergraduate and joined the project, they were just reaching Saturn. So working on a project with people who had been conceiving of it my entire lifetime was just a thrill of, and seeing their enthusiasm for this project. And those first images that we got from Cassini were really mind-boggling. We had never had such high resolution of Saturn or its moons before. It was beautiful to see them, to be one of the first people to see them. When I came back to JPL in 2010 after my PhD, I worked on a mission called Grail. This mission was the first formation-flown spacecraft around another planetary body. So this was another first where it wasn't just one spacecraft we had to send two, and they had to be in lockstep together the entire mission in order to do the science. And this was super exciting because some of the graduate research that I had done on spheres was how do you keep satellites in formation, and different techniques to both learn what the positioning is between the satellites and also do the control. The Cassini and Grail were both super successful missions. There were others that I worked that were not so successful, like the Optiques mission. This one has a special place in my heart because Optiques was as close to doing my PhD thesis on a real mission as I could have gotten within just like 3 or 4 years of being outside of my PhD. So it was supposed to be a robotically assembled space telescope in space. And my PhD thesis was on control techniques for the autonomous assembly of space telescopes. So I was super excited that I would actually be able to be working on a control system for an in-space assembled telescopes, but because of complexities and differences in who wanted to own the project and really sell it, Optiques ended up being canceled before the critical design review. After that, I worked on OCO3, which was another payload mission to the International Space Station. That one also had its fits and starts in terms of it was using a spare instrument from a previous mission. So it constantly had to fight to say it was a worthy mission. It was bathtubed 2 or 3 times before it actually flew. So in one of the bathtubs, at that point, I had to leave the project because March 2020 started to get more involved, and I couldn't work on both projects at once. This other middle one here is a small satellite dynamics testbed. I will get into that a little bit later in the presentation. And And then finally, the one that I've been working on since 2013 is Mars 2020. This was the project that I worked on, so-called Cradle to Grave, where I started at the very inception, back when it was just a paper design with hope for launch date, all the way through the landing of Perseverance and through a little bit of the surface operations. So by working on, Mars 2020 for so long, I've been able to see it grow from, just an idea to a full-fledged spacecraft and see its own successes. So it's been a super challenging, super rewarding mission to be able to see it through all the way from beginning to end. So this story of getting from how I was as a child, wanting to be a pediatrician, and then learning about myself, of what I was good at in terms of physics versus biology, what I liked to do, building things versus, analyzing the test data, and really building in that passion for space exploration into my day job, that process allowed me to find the niche that I'm in now of systems engineering for a control system of spacecraft that are going to new worlds. And that brings it all together, because I was able to find the niche that I was super interested in, not just space in general, but the aspects of space that I was interested in. And then also what things that I had the personality for, what were my skill strengths in that engineering discipline to be able to guide which job I take. By being able to do both and really own up to who I was and what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, I was able to focus on a job that set me up for success, where I was both super interested, that would keep my attention and motivation high, and that I had the skills to succeed, or I had the either the mindset or the communication skills or the others to innately be able to succeed. And that really allowed me to get to where I am today, where I can see something through and have it be successful and enjoy the process of doing it. Not to say that it was easy. I mean, things are always hard, and it wasn't as clear starting at the beginning of where I was going to end up. What really helped was the second aspect here of the support system that I had, because throughout this exploration, I was able to rely on this support system, both for emotional support, feasible support, and just strength to draw in to give me the motivation to take that next step, to be able to lean into those opportunities. Growing up, I came from an Indian American immigrant background. Education was always important in our household. Both my parents came from STEM backgrounds, so they were super encouraging of STEM and education in general, to the point where they made it the priority. So I was lucky in that anything that I wanted to do that was education bent or learning, they found the way to support. So I was able to spend my summers doing internships. I was able to go to space camp or go to different science seminars or camps growing up to foster that interest and encouragement in space. In terms of friends, it wasn't really until I got to undergraduate that I met friends who would really support and who could understand me in all different aspects. And this was both from the women in science aspect, but also the shared culture of the immigrant aspect of knowing how to balance both aspects, so you weren't one side or another, and finding friends who were in a similar background or who could understand that, I think really helped to solidify who I was and to help me to own up to it. So I wasn't, I was living up to the potential of who I was in all aspects, and I didn't feel the need to be one way in one set of people and another set. And that, I think, gave me the strength to own up to who I was, even when and placed in uncomfortable or unique situations where I was the only person of color, where I was the only woman in those different fields, like in the classes in undergraduate. In graduate school, I had the very great fortune that at the time that I joined, it just so happened that there were 2 or 3 other girls who joined the same graduate lab as I did. And this was a fairly rare occurrence. There was usually only one every couple of years or every few years in the lab, but we happened to have a convergence that year. And you can see all 4 of us here in this picture during graduate school. What ended up happening, actually, the administrator for our graduate lab was so excited that we had so many females that year that she made an all girls office, because she finally had, more than one girl to fill an office. There was 3 of us that shared an office for the first few years of grad school. And it was not until I think later on into grad school that I realized how valuable that was. Having been the only girl for so long throughout high school, throughout undergraduate, finally getting into graduate school in this highly technical field, and suddenly having women around me every day in our office, it was kind of an eye-opener, because suddenly it wasn't just technical talk. It wasn't just, sports talk or things that I could only peripherally associate with. We had the breadth of topics in our office, including all the girly topics that we wouldn't have necessarily discussed with others. Like that particular year in grad school, 2 out of 3 of us were engaged, I think, and we ended up having like stacks of wedding planning magazines on our desk next to our textbooks of dynamics and controls. So being able to blend the two seamlessly that year was eye-opening for me, because it allowed me to see that I didn't have to be a certain way. I didn't have to be a tomboy just because I was going into a field that was fairly male dominated, that I should still be myself. And there was an example or a means to do that. And being able to share that with my friends that year helped to strengthen that for all of us. In addition to the family and friends growing up, one of the most important things, I think, was finding a spouse and a partner that really supported my job. I met a lot of guys who were intimidated by who I was at the time, studying at MIT in this very technical field. And I wasn't sure how it would perceive. I'd received comments during undergrad to the likes of, well, why are you studying that? Then you're never going to find a guy who wants to be with you. And those sort of comments really put me on guard that I may not find the partner. So I was super lucky to have found my husband. He in itself is a physician scientist and has a demanding career as a pediatrician, but has always been 100% supportive and probably my #1 fan throughout all of this. And I bring it up because not only is he a true partner in that we balance our work and life so that we both have opportunities to succeed. The choice of where we lived in Los Angeles was not just based on me wanting to go to JPL, but him also finding a good fellowship program. The handling of work and life with our children at home is done jointly, where my test bed shifts were coordinated with his call schedule at the hospital, such that both of us had the opportunity to succeed and that we would support each other in the goals that we wanted to do for our career. My husband actually, like myself, he grew up with two parents in STEM. Both his parents, including his mother, were physicians. So he grew up with the mindset that it was normal for the mother to work, and that was expected. And marrying into that family, both my husband and his parents have been super helpful, where both his parents and my parents will actually fly out if we need help, where like if we can't get our schedules to mix and I have to be somewhere and he's on call, then we have that support structure of the grandparents who are willing to come in and help so that both of us still are able to succeed. And I think having that level of support has really enabled both of us to be able to try to just reach for the goals that we want to do, because we have people around us who are supporting us and encouraging us to do that and lending a hand when needed. And finally, the last support structure is the one that I found at JPL. This is a picture of us at one of our super technical meetings, but it happened to fall on Halloween. So we're all dressed up in our various costumes for this meeting. And I like this picture because it exemplifies the type of bond that we built. You know, after working on a project for 8 years with the same people, we really formed that tight-knit group where we were comfortable with each other, where it really, I was blessed that it was a diverse group where we had a mix of women, men, immigrants, people who've been raised here, non-binary people, the young people, experienced people, and having that diverse background set in the group really allowed us to be accepting of everyone and to seek out all those opinions, because everyone had a different viewpoint or a different way of approaching a problem that was based on their backgrounds. And that allowed us to build a strong team that was able to tackle these hard problems. So this support structure was really pivotal in being able to do the success, having the family, having the friends that understood you, picking a partner that was an equal partner that would bring you up, not put you down. And then finally, having the people at work really form a family that was tight knit enough to bring each other up, where the sum of the parts was really more than the total that we could have envisioned. Just was the bond, I think, that brought everything up that allowed us to succeed. And finally, to actively do your best. As I mentioned, there's no one path to achieving success, and it's about how you learn from each experience and how you make the most of it. So my first experience at Goddard Space Flight Center, we had an internship. The actual internship was just working on a computer doing CAD parts, but there happened to be this rocket competition that was going on, and the co-interns and I approached our mentor to see if we could participate. And he was like, "Oh yeah, sure." And just asking opened up all these doors, because suddenly he got excited too. He took us to the model rocket shop, allowed us to use some of his account in order to buy the parts. We were able to learn machining at the Goddard Machine Shop, and just putting together that project and having experience of working with that mentor at Goddard to launch these on campus was just eye-opening of that whole process. And really one of the best parts of that internship was this rocket competition, even though it wasn't in the wording of the internship per se. The next example of that was going to conferences. As an undergraduate in some of these internships or researches, they tend to be just black and white, and you do it for those 6 weeks and it's kind of done at the end. But I took the initiative for one of them to actually write up the poster. And it's not groundbreaking research, but the act of writing it up, to going to the conference to present it, gave me so much experience on what it was like to take it through, what it was like to present it at a national conference, and allowed me to have the skills. So when I got to the next level of a presentation that mattered with my graduate research or at JPL, I'd already practiced a couple of times through these type of internships or undergraduate research that I felt comfortable giving those type of presentations and putting them together. Finally, one of the activities that I did in graduate school was this Zero Robotics competition. When I was at Houston training one of the astronauts, he also had a background in controls. He's like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could get middle school and high school students involved in this? And I was like, oh, that would be great, but how would we do that? We ended up just talking back and forth and pulling in people as we needed to, and running a pilot program. We're like, okay, we'll get these middle schools and see, what level that we can give them a challenge of how to code something and then help them translate it into code for the satellites. And then this astronaut would run it on the space station. I was involved just in the pilot program of getting all those pieces that show it was possible. Since then, that program has really expanded, and it's become a worldwide initiative to help middle school and high school students actually send their algorithms to space. They have a whole tiered competition where they test it on the ground and compete them in terms of timing before they get to test in space. So it's amazing what you can do if you put in the little initiative. What was a conversation, at a Mexican restaurant outside of Johnson Space Center between me and the astronaut has turned into this worldwide challenge that has engaged so many students from the middle school all the way through the undergraduate disciplines. And then finally, even at JPL, when I first started at JPL was now getting into the CubeSat small satellite business. I had done my undergraduate research on that, and as well as my graduate research on these small satellites, so I had some experience. And I noticed that JPL, coming from the really big spacecraft, couldn't quite get their mind wrapped around how to do small satellites cheaply. So me and one of my colleagues, Laura Jones-Wilson, we actually started this small satellite dynamics testbed in order to have a platform that was validated that we could use to be efficient about how we implement small satellite missions. And just, we were able to see the need, but the mechanism of founding it and going and talking to the right people and selling it, I learned so much from getting it up off the ground. And now that it's established, it's really smooth in order to get the missions through, and has added value to JPL and for my own personal career growth of how to manage a lab and go out and seek business and pursue it. So these are 4 examples of how I was able to find opportunities where I was that weren't necessarily obvious, weren't necessarily what my role was supposed to be, but in taking that additional step allowed me to gain the skills for different aspects, whether it be marketing or presentation or creativity, or even the technical aspect of putting something together like the rocket or the testbed. And those skills have stayed with me and helped me succeed in the next role that I've taken. So it's not just about, looking for an opportunity, but it's also about finding where you can add value and creating the opportunities for yourself. A lot of it is based on networking, talking to people, attending the conferences, reading a lot of what's available out there in order to make those connections of what you can do. And then finally, using every opportunity that you have to learn, to experience, and to grow, and then decide what the next step should be, whether the opportunity was pleasant or unpleasant. Every opportunity is a learning experience, and it may change your course. You may choose to take a little detour, but as long as you know what you like, you don't like, and be true to yourself of what you're learning, then every opportunity is a potential for taking you one step closer to your goal. And that's kind of the 3 big lessons that I learned looking back of how I've been able to succeed and get from that little Indian girl to being the mission commentator for the NASA Perseverance mission. knowing yourself, being true to yourself, and that means internalizing, being honest with yourself of what you know, don't know, what you like, you don't like. Choosing your support system carefully. We don't necessarily can't choose our parents, but we can choose our friends. We can choose where we work. We can choose our partners in life. And that is just as important, if not more so, than the support system we're born into. Seeking out opportunities that are in line with your goals, whether it's to explore or to experience. You may not know why exactly it helps you, but being able to seek out those opportunities to learn from that actively is super important to achieving your goals. And then finally, don't give up. Perseverance was very aptly named for us for the year of the pandemic, but it really goes to show how motivation and perseverance can keep you going to overcome the challenges as long as you have an end in sight and you don't give up. You can always keep moving one step towards that goal. Even if sometimes you take 2 steps back, you can always make up for it as long as you don't give up. And that's kind of all I had. These are a few pictures of me from the mission operations last year, from launch to landing. And then my super highlight was actually getting to talk to President Biden when he called the team to say thank you, which was a fangirl moment for me.
That is incredible. Swati, thank you so much for talking to us. What an inspiring story. I think that my dad has always told me something that you just said the whole time, was that you just never miss an opportunity. Always take every opportunity that you're given. And it seems like you have done that incredibly well. Yeah. That is so cool. So we can have a few minutes for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Everything's okay. On time. And I can, while the questions populate, I have hundreds. So you told us a lot about your successes in your career, and there have been plenty. And you mentioned this one time in high school that you didn't get into the magnet school that you were supposed to get into. Was there any time that after you chose, like, I'm doing this space exploration thing, that you then hit a roadblock where you didn't make the cut, or you didn't get the grant, or you didn't whatever, like, and then how did you have to shift in your mindset in order to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, so learning from failure is something I learned quite well in graduate school. My professor was very good about having us write grants and write proposals, and you only win like 10% of the proposals that you write. So I spent, time and time again, I was like, oh, this would be a super cool research project. And and you spend hours and hours working on these grants, and then you get hyped up on the type of research you're going to do, and then it's a rejection, and then it's another rejection. And that kept happening, right? So 2 or 3 of these rejections, actually, when I was like a 3rd or 4th year, my funding kind of, like, because we hadn't won so many in a row, like, my funding was tentative. Like, I had enough scholarship to, I think, pay for most of my tuition, but not enough for my RA. And that was really dicey, because I was like, crap, do I need to halt my PhD and take a couple of years off? I really don't want to do that. I actually have momentum. Do I need to take a job in order to, like, be able to cover my other expenses while I'm doing that? And how much can I actually work? That was a really touchy time. That was like a year or 2 before I graduated. And my advisor and I worked out like this funky system of working part-time at JPL, doing this other task, and then doing my PhD on the side. And that was a pretty stressful time. It was amusing because that last year of my PhD, I was writing so many of the grants, then I defended, and then 6 months later, my advisor called. He's like, oh, by the way, we won 3 out of 4 of those grants. I was like, well, that's great timing.
No way.
I don't get to partake in that success, but at least it funded some other graduate students for their PhDs.
Man, that's a tough situation to be in, for sure. Man, that is incredible. And we also just want to let you know that there is a shout out from Sri Sama and family. She is on the call. She wanted to make sure that she said that she was here to support. There's a few of us that are on the committee that are also in Sri's lab. So we're all okay. So one anonymous attendee wants to know, how have you sought mentorship in your career goals?
Mentorship is super important. When I was, so I did my undergraduate research, and the professor that I worked for, he was the only professor at Cornell at the time that was doing like satellite building, space satellite type of building. So that became a natural mentor. When I went to graduate school, I interviewed with a few professors in the aeroastro department, but I ended up actually going to the Space Systems Lab. My undergraduate advisor got his PhD from the same lab that I went for my PhD. So it ended up being a transition like that. And that that structure has been really good for me. It was a pretty large lab. So it was a tiered type of system where like the lowest level first year graduates, students would like get mentored by like the fourth, fifth year graduate students, and then there would be the advisor. So I liked that actually because I got along well with the senior graduate students, and it felt comfortable for me to go to them with all these like minor questions that I could like work out and before I actually went to my advisor. So that kind of was like the first level mentorship, because they helped teach the ins and outs of how to do things, especially when we were working with hardware. So my advisor, you know, he had helped build the hardware, but he didn't know the guts of it. So like working with the senior grad students of like learning the actual guts of the hardware, and that was super helpful. My PhD advisor was a really great mentor, not just from the thinking part of PhD, but I learned a lot in terms of like how to network, how to write proposals, you know, especially the 10% that, you know, you actually win, and then how to market, you know, how to find a need and then find a way to influence others into going along with that idea. I'm in system engineering now, and a lot of that is influence-based, right? Systems engineers, we're kind of the glue that works all the interfaces and brings it together, but we're not like the person in charge of the money who can make the final say. So a lot of that, getting your hands into it, of like getting your thoughts of how the design should be, is through influence and not through like, this is my code, I'm going to do it this way. So learning that from my PhD, starting from my PhD advisor, has been super helpful to focus how I communicate with people, how I present things in order to get the design in the way that I feel like I want to go. At JPL, there have been a few mentors that I've resonated with. A couple of the women managers who hired me in specifically, like being able to look up to them, because there's not a lot of us in this controls field, and seeing their example of how they managed both, and certain key you know, examples, especially in like work-life balance, of how do you navigate both. Just having that example was enough, like in certain cases, for me to lean in instead of stepping back for a different opportunity.
Sure.
And then I, you know, once I got up my guts to just cold call people or cold email people, like I've been using it somewhat to my advantage whenever needed. I was like, oh, you remember me? We worked on this like 6 years ago. Can you talk with me about this? I've been pretty blatantly in doing that, especially recently now that I've finished on 2020 and I'm charting my next path forward.
Yeah, like, and that was kind of one of a follow-up question that I wanted to ask, if we have like a few more minutes. But I think, what is the next step for you? What is the next 5, you know, what's like, I don't know if you can tell us, but like, yeah, is there, like, what is your career change now that you've like completed this mission, you know, it's ultra successful? Like, what does that mean for you?
So the next year or two, at least, I'm the supervisor for the discipline group that I was part of. So in that role, I get to see a lot of the different missions, not just the one. So I'm super excited about being able to learn about a lot of different missions that JPL is working on, and how we contribute, and being able to support the engineers in my discipline to have the tools that they need to be successful across multiple projects, not just for one. And then looking forward, I'm hoping to go back to the drawing board, right? I've been on the operations implementations side for a long time. I want to go back to the early phases and get into like finding a new concept, new science mission to work on, and something intriguing and exploration related, and figuring out. There's a lot of different ones that JPL will be working on in the near term, you know, kind of wide slate, things from going to asteroids to going to Enceladus, or going to Uranus or Neptune. I can't even remember all the ones that have kind of been thrown out, going to Venus. You know, there's a lot of these that are at the proposal level, they're kind of all churned, right? Like, you know, we have a lot of different concepts going at once. So getting to work on that. And that's another realm where you work on all of these, but only like one makes it through. So it'll be exciting to work on them and work on a few to see what actually goes forward.
Sure, absolutely. Again, we're gonna go over time just a couple minutes, because I want to ask this one last question. That someone asks if, you know, tips for someone who's always been interested in physics but discouraged by family, or, you know, or he or she is in a different track now, which apparently is BME. But is it too late to do the science that you love? Is there any a time when you should stop?
It's not too late. And I will say there's so many different paths to working on something. Like at JPL for these science missions, we have so many different people with so many different backgrounds working on it. We have biologists, we have chemists, we have technicians, we have, you know, electrical engineers, we have you know, people actually who came up through the movie industry, you know, and people who came up through politics. So there's so many different, we actually have one rocket actually that shoots people. There's so many different paths that you can really chart your own way, as long as you, it's not going to be easy, but you have to go out and put yourself out there to talk to people, to listen to what they need, and to be honest with yourself of what skills have you learned in your discipline that would be transferable, and how do you market yourself to be able to do those, to kind of go from one to the other Like biomedical engineering on Perseverance, we have so much of it is in search of the signs for past life. So all of the engineering that we're doing to create the samples is, you know, has to be super clean. So we have to make sure from contamination that it doesn't have anything, from planetary protection that we don't bring it back. So we have a lot of people who have chemistry and biology backgrounds in order to help us understand how do we test for those things? How do we build things that are clean for different types of contaminants or organic matter? A lot of the scientists who search for those things in astrobiology have those backgrounds, and then have kind of veered from those backgrounds into learning about geology and space to apply it to that area. So you have the passion, you have to persevere and create the opportunities from yourself. It will involve a lot of research, a lot of talking to people, a lot of networking, a lot of marketing of yourself, and knowing how to spin it. But I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I've seen people make the transition from politics to system engineering, from rockets to engineering, from graphic design to wanting to work in the space industry. And, you know, there's always a way, whether it means you have to take another class, whether it means you might need to do one step back to go 3 steps forward. There may be things like that, but if you want it bad enough, there are ways to get it.
Yeah, that's very encouraging and good, and inspiring, and a good note to end on. Thank you, Swati, so much for joining us. This was incredible. And we are going to turn it over to Gulnoosh and Christine for kind of some ending notes. But thank you again so much for coming. This was a highlight.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mohan. That was fantastic. And so yeah, we're just going to not take up too much of your time because we know we're a little bit over, but we just wanted to make sure we give a quick thank you to all of our amazing speakers today. Thank you to our keynotes, Brittany Young and Dr. Mohan. Thank you to our panelists, Azadeh, Melanie Shimano, and Erika Ross. It was really truly inspiring and empowering to hear about all these women and to see the, who is actually leading the field right now in STEM and what they are doing. We know we were talking about Zoom fatigue a little bit earlier, and I know this was a very long event, but hopefully you guys were just as enthralled as we were and you really enjoyed being here. And thank you for taking the time to our speakers for coming and talking to us and sharing your experiences. And we also want to once again thank our amazing organizing committee and volunteers for helping us get day one done. We think it's been a success so far, and we're very excited for the next day. And I thank our audience for coming and staying with us. And we hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for all the amazing questions and really getting that discussion going. And we hope we see you tomorrow as well.
Yeah, so tomorrow we're starting at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So that's a different time from today. We'll have a session on advocacy in life. We'll start with a panel discussion followed by a talk from Jody Davis. This is very exciting. And like Dolu said, we hope that you'll all join us again tomorrow. At 12 p.m., we will have a networking and poster session. And I think we have a separate slide on that, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We also want to remind you about our giveaways. You have a chance to win some very cool prizes. So we want you to participate to get the most out of the event. Keep the conversation going by tagging us on social media. Make sure to join our networking session. Ask questions during the sessions. And you can do a few other things as well that are listed in the program to increase your chances of winning some of those cool prizes. But besides that, we wanted to specifically point out our networking and poster session. It's happening tomorrow at 12 p.m. and it will be on a different platform. It's called GatherTown. If you're unfamiliar with GatherTown, it's a super cool virtual networking space where we can all kind of meet and video chat with each other. If you want, you can save the link or write this down. But if you're joining us again tomorrow morning, then we'll be posting it here. We'll have it up so you don't have to worry about it. With that, I think we just want to thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow.
Everyone, see you tomorrow.